Hello, Commissioner Jones-Dixon. Can we test your mic and camera, please?
Hey, good morning. I cannot turn my camera on at the moment. I'm in my...
Yes, I can. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Jones-Dixon is present virtually today. Vice Chair Brim Edwards is present virtually until 10 a.m., is excused until 10:15, and then will rejoin in person. And Commissioner Singleton is excused at 11:30 a.m., and Commissioner Moyer is excused at 11:40. So lots of movement today in the board meeting. Audience members, I want to start by asking you to please silence your electronic devices. I would also like to remind you that in addition to the audience in this room, we have people watching and listening online, so please consider your language in comments and testimony today. Today's meeting is a hybrid board meeting. Some presenters and guests will appear in person and some will appear virtually. For those presenting virtually, please mute your mic when not speaking, and when presenting, make sure to unmute your mic and turn on your camera. For those joining us in person to provide public testimony or present, please turn your mic on when you begin speaking and off when you've completed your remarks. And for all presenters, please state your name for the record before speaking or responding to questions. May I have a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved.
So moved.
All right, we have Commissioner Singleton moving, Commissioner Moyer seconds. Approval of the consent calendar. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Hi.
All right, wonderful. The consent calendar is approved.
Opportunity for public comment on non-agenda matters. This is a time for the board to hear public testimony, not for board deliberation. When it is your turn to speak, I will call your name and unmute you or call you to the presenter's table. I'll set a timer for 3 minutes when you begin speaking and announce when your time is up, at which point please wrap up your sentence. So we have 4 people signed up for verbal testimony and received 1 written testimony, which was shared with board members and staff. First up, we have Terrell Garrett, injured and pissed off, Charles Johnson, and lightning.
Terrell Garrett, good morning.
Morning.
I would like to recognize the work of your auditor, Mark Rose, and the Multnomah County's willingness to be the first to acknowledge and address the problem of government contracting greenwashing in Portland. The county's FAC 9 requires recycling of construction debris, as well as LEED Gold certification for all projects. While recycling construction waste is one of the many possible paths to LEED certification, it is not required. Therefore, LEED certification does not guarantee the county commitment to green building practices has been met. The only way to ensure compliance with FAC 9 is to contractually require projects to recycle construction waste. Your recent auditor's report has garnered the national attention of the CDRA, which is our industry association, as well as the United States Green Building Council, or the LEED people. Last week, board members and industry leaders of CDRA met with top executives of the United States Green Building Council in Los Angeles to discuss this matter. We're embarrassed and are trying to fix things from our end. What has happened to Multnomah County is not representative of our industry. Despite City of Rose's claims to the contrary, we do not estimate recycling, we actually recycle. Even if we fix our end, it won't guarantee your materials will be recycled. Compliance with FAC 9 can only be guaranteed with language and requirements in the construction contracts. Over the past 6 months, I have spent a great deal of time with industry peers from across the country discussing this problem, what has worked and not worked nationwide, and what would be a reasonable solution. First, a construction recycling requirement must be fair and achievable for most projects. 75%, the current mark, is unrealistic. Second, the numbers must be real. A disinterested third party needs to certify facility recycling rates based upon national and not local standards. Finally, there must be a 1% of project cost penalty for noncompliance in order to ensure that compliance. So this is my pitch. The Recycling Certification Institute, or RCI, is a nonprofit that was formed by the CDRA and the U.S. Green Building Council to combat greenwashing of construction recycling rates. They certify facilities, audit results, and publish them on the internet. Green Halo is a construction recycling tracking and oversight service. Set a 30% recycle requirement, require mixed construction waste to go to an RCI certified facility, require the contractor to use Green Halo, and enforce the penalty for noncompliance. By utilizing systems that are already in place at no cost to the county. The county can oversee construction recycling and ensure construction debris environmental stewardship. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
SAFE, that spells safe. My name is Injured and Pissed Off. I forgot to hand in these papers. They're also from OHSU social workers, apparently. I was looking, or I'll be talking December 3rd at City Hall about an article that I mentioned, Willamette Week Uninvited Guest. If you use those 4 words, you can read the article. And yet at the City of Portland, if you enter the word City of Portland, Injured and Pissed Off, the 6 words, you'll see the article censored. It's blacked out. In fact, even the Willamette Week article that for the uninvited guest, Willamette Week uninvited guest, that they blacked it out. They don't have the photograph of me or my service animal. And even Google, as I said, if you look up City of Portland, Injured and Pissed Off, it comes up with tons of links. I'm like the first 7 or 8 links on there at the top of the page, and then, of course, it goes further than that if you press search more or something like that. And anyways, this OHSU worker had scheduled me to go to a meeting to take a biopsy from a shoulder at OHSU. All places to that Tram building, I think it's called the B building. I have a lifetime ban. Of course, they're not, the worker, when I informed them of that they agreed to cancel the appointment so I wouldn't be in trouble. And I don't want to go back to those lying people at OHSU, but of course, while I'm being treated by OHSU and housed in the Banfield studios, they've got quite a mess to clean up. They certainly haven't even, I met with a doctor and she said that I was the 3rd one in a week that had horseshoe kidneys, but nothing's been mentioned about my spinal cord injuries or MRI or CAT scans.
Thank you. And we'll make sure to get those papers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Buenos dias. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's nice to be back. Took a couple weeks off from y'all, and it's good of you to ease me back with this agenda that only has one item that's available for public testimony, so I will be back. Because it's some East County Day action way out there at 302nd. And just to focus on the present moment and go back to C1, how many people in this county even have any idea, where's there a bridge on Stark Street? I think that's for Commissioner Vin Jones-Dixon's district. I think it's way out in the north, not Gresham lands. Or I guess it would have to be in Gresham. But I do hope that someday part of your beliefs and your fiduciary responsibility will be to partner more strongly with the clerk's office so that dollar items are put on the agenda. It would just, I think, help some people know what things, you know, and maybe also someplace to clarify the moving goalposts that you sometimes use. It's not usually within one term, but as Chair Vega-Peterson knows, at different times, the thresholds, the financial thresholds for different types of action have been moved up or down, and it would be good to have like a historic place where we can look to see the hard number for what has to come before the county board in full and what's discretionary. So if you can maybe find a place to make that information more accessible. Moving out of this room to the broader world at large, I was listening live with Barbie Weber and I last night. We were listening live to the president speaking, being somewhat stressed out. Of course, I'm only talking about Madam President, President Pirtle-Guinea of the county, and this awkward partnership we have between the county and the city, where someday we hope to have a beautiful, positive metric that we can talk about in public. And I want that metric to be actual human beings, not beds, not mats, not spaces on the floor. I would love to see some beautiful metrics, and I think there actually are some. As election time gets closer, maybe you'll find them. We have, through the Metro Housing Bond Fund and the city's bond fund, we have created some housing. I think one thing that is going to be sort of disappointed about the housing is to see how few people were moved directly from homelessness into that housing. And that's part of the problem with that is affordability. There's tens of thousands of people that need housing financial assistance, and sometimes it's the people who are homelessness have the hardest time getting over the hump and into housing. I'll see you when we talk about the exciting slope and drainage.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a quick comment. So that, it's been identified that there is a smell of like burnt rubber in that back room there, and facilities is aware and they're looking into it. It's something on the second floor. So if you smell that in the room, we are checking in to see what that is. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Super We the People Labs. One of the concerns I have at Multnomah County right now is that I think you're not moving aggressively enough on getting body-worn cameras on the Sheriff's Department. And again, from my position, as you know, my main focus is actually intense monitoring, community oversight of the Multnomah County River Patrol, of the likes nobody's ever seen before. I can assure you of that. And as an example, so you understand I'm not just saying that, I would like all of the commissioners, if you do get the time, to pull up on YouTube the civil rights lawyer. Now, what he does, he goes over the body-worn camera video. He's an ex-prosecutor attorney, and he analyzes everything with such detail so you can truly understand the benefits of the body-worn cameras. And when you look at all his cases, he's had over 375 million viewers. If you want to get reelected, you want to be on his side, because the community members watch this and they understand exactly what's going on, and they have a clear understanding if the DA dismisses the case before it goes anywhere further, if the community member comes back and a resolution is already made before it goes any further, and then again, if there's excessive force, how to literally look at that video and audio and pick things out. And it's really amazing. Again, that's a civil rights lawyer. His name is John Bryans, and he has numerous cases. I hope you at least take the time to go over it to understand that you are responsible for the safety of the community members. You, the commissioners and the chair. You have to have systems in place to check and balance law enforcement and community members that may be making false claims against law enforcement. So when you understand the body-worn camera video and audio from a prosecutor's position, from an attorney's position, and he does this, he just does this, helps other cases out, and then he does his own cases, and he just outlines everything down to the statutes, down to how the call came in, and they went for the wrong person, and they beat up the wrong person, and they come back to the call, which your video would not pick up that 911 call. So you have to go down every piece of information to put the whole story together to benefit the community members, to protect them, if something isn't going right for them. You have to be able to do that, and that is what community oversight is. Get the body-worn cameras on the Sheriff's Department. If you have to mandate it from the government, get them on Multnomah County River Patrol, because I'll be talking to the...
Thank you.
We need to get that done immediately.
Thank you.
That's all for public testimony.
Great, let's move on to R1. Thank you.
R1, resolution of necessity to enter into negotiations for a slope and drainage easement for 302nd and Jackson Culvert Replacement Project.
May I have a motion? Second. Commissioner Singleton moves, Commissioner Moyer seconds, approval of R1. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Bega Peterson and members of the Board of Commissioners. My name is Lance Calvert. I am the Roads Engineering Services Manager with Transportation Division of DCS. I use he, him pronouns. As noted on the agenda, I'm here before you this morning to seek approval of a resolution of necessity for the acquisition of real property at the 302nd and Jackson Culvert Replacement Project. Currently, there's an existing 24-inch diameter drainage culvert pipe at this location that is near collapse. Luckily, it was identified early before a complete failure by our operations and maintenance staff, and we've been working to design a replacement for that culvert location. One thing that has come up is the existing pipe currently resides on private property. This is actually quite common for this age of pipe and materials. So our goal is to acquire property and temporary easements to replace the pipe and put it back into good working order. I would be happy to answer any questions. That it's pretty straightforward, just a pipe replacement project.
Thank you so much, Lance. Really appreciate the explanation. Are there any questions from the board? I'll start with the folks who are virtual. Okay, I don't hear any from the folks in person. Okay, thank you. No questions. I don't have any questions either. Just really appreciate the work that's been happening with our transportation division over the last several years to really take a look at our culverts and see how we can put them back into place. Oh, hi, welcome. Put them in place for better passage and better use for our transportation system. So thank you. Did we have any public testimony on this item?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have 2 people signed up.
Okay, great. We will invite the public testimony, and then we'll have our vote.
Charles Johnson and Lightning.
Good morning again. It's free. Apparently this project is free. I didn't open up the APR. The APR, the agenda placement request, would maybe mention money. And also, Chair Peterson, don't forget the other side of the culvert, transportation over and pass through under, sometimes for fish. I didn't get a chance to open up the map for way out at 302nd and Jackson. I don't know how close to the county line you are when you're way out at 300. It's maybe not, you're not out of the county because it's 50 blocks past Mount Hood Community College in the 257 Kane area. But since that was such a brief agenda item, I'm going to flex a little bit until I get shut down and say, when we talk about the deflection center, we should talk about the actual capacity. What's the maximum number of people we could afford to put through the deflection center? And then we should do it. We shouldn't stop, we shouldn't block people because we think they might not be able to get a criminal deferral or anything like that. When we pay for a deflection center, we should take people who are struggling with substance abuse issues and let them get in there, and if they're not involved in actual deflection, so what? These people need maximum care, maximum interventions. I won't be able to say that because that briefing's not open for public testimony, so I'll probably leave and tune into it later. But I hope that that will rest in your mind, is that we're paying an outside contractor and some wonderful local people to be available to do work. And they would like to do that work. I mean, okay, it's work, so sometimes we like it when our job is not operating at maximum capacity. But you know, you're the Board of Health. Our job, part of the job here is saving lives. So let's look at capacity that we funded in the deflection center and have maximum positive impact on these people who are struggling with addiction to substances that we seem to be really focused on keeping people from coming across the border, and we're sending goons that probably raided the Capitol on January 6th to beat up people in many cities, but we're not really interdicting a lot of fentanyl, are we?
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Super We the People Labs. I would appreciate it if you keep your clocks up to date inside these council chambers. It would be nice if your clock in the back room is correct. Just bringing that to your attention. On the culvert itself, one of the things I have always had a problem with is condemnation of public or private ownership properties. And I understand you're going to try to do a purchase agreement and negotiate a reasonable price. I understand the property across the street by another owner appears that you've already negotiated the terms, because you've said nothing about that today. Now, getting back to Deborah Stouffer's property, I noticed the square footage amounts are quite small, 517 square foot, and then you want to do a temporary easement for work, which is about 1,000 square feet. And again, I guess on my position is that on the culvert itself, we didn't really get into the dimensions of it. I'd like to know what the dimension of that is. And also I wanted to understand is that with the new systems in place, can they actually do a plastic coating on the inside for longevity? And do they do that? And I'm curious, because I know they do that on some of the sewer pipes. They'll actually have come in and they'll put plastic through the pipes. And I wonder if they do that on culverts to get more longevity out of them. And I'm sure the presenter could possibly speak on that matter. And again, my position is just that I have an issue on any of the condemnation proceedings. And getting back to, I guess, some other issues is that I want to have a clear understanding on the euthanasia issue. I'd like to have an appeals process on that euthanasia policy, to where if the volunteers are really upset, they have a right to submit an appeal and say, I'd like to, before you do euthanasia, to have a meeting and be able to present my position. And it's a very simple thing to do. It comes down to proper notification to the volunteers that this is happening, to where they don't just appear out of the blue. The animal they've been taking care of, grown an attachment to, has been euthanized. It's showing respect to the volunteers to where they have the right to step forward and maybe get an extra 2 to 3 days before euthanasia takes place, have a little meeting, let things be worked out in a reasonable manner. And I really think that should be in your policy itself. Again, on that euthanasia is so important, and especially on the emotions of the volunteers, for the animals to rest in peace.
Thank you. Commissioner Jones-Dixon, I wasn't sure if you heard, since you were on your way here, if you had any questions on this item.
No, just a comment.
Okay, please go for it.
Just want to say welcome, Lance. You're a year into your position, and you've been getting things done. I guess I'll ask a question that Lightning asked, as far as like if you can educate us as far as the linings within the culverts. That would be great.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones-Dixon. Yeah, so in this case, the pipe is partially collapsed, so the option for like an in-situ liner would not be available for this particular occasion. That would be certainly something that we would look at as a cost-effective measure in certain applications. In either case, we need access to the ends of the pipe as it exists right now, which is on private property, so we would need to get the easement acquisition to be on their property.
Good. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Tasia, can we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Moyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Singleton?
Yes.
Commissioner Jones-Dixon?
Yes.
Commissioner Brim Edwards?
Commissioner Brim Edwards, are you able to vote? She was going to be leaving at 10, so she may have already stepped away. Okay. Go
Chair
ahead.
Vega Peterson?
Aye. The resolution is adopted. All right.
R2, deflection program briefing.
All right, for our next item for today's board meeting, we have a briefing on the deflection program. Today's briefing by our Multnomah County Health Department is going to focus on the first year of the programs and services relevant to House Bill 4002 and Multnomah County's deflection program. Our goal with the deflection program has always been to expand our behavioral health supports and connect community members to the pathways needed to begin or deepen their recovery journey while deflecting them away from our criminal justice system for addiction issues. We're also committed to reducing the number of overdoses while improving overall community health, well-being, and safety. Since opening, Multnomah County's Deflection Center has been helping to divert people from jail, emergency departments, or being left on the street. I want to thank the many county staff working on this program for your incredible energy and commitment to this work. I'll turn things over now to our interim behavioral health director, Anthony Jordan, to take us through today's presentation. Good morning.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Anthony Jordan. I'm the interim behavioral health director for the Health Department Behavioral Health Division. Also presenting with me today is Natalie Amar. She's our deflection supervisor. I want to start by thanking everyone who has been involved in this program, the staff, the board, House Bill 4002 leadership, Turk House, and other partners who helped stand up this program and provided us recommendations on how we could continue making it better. But before I get started in the presentation, or before we get started in the presentation, I would like to share a quote from Martin Luther King. What he says is that we aren't where we want to be, we aren't where we ought to be, but thank God we're not where we used to be. This quote resonates with me because it embodies the stories of our deflection program, which is one of continuing progress. Next slide. Today we want to show, our objectives today is to show what has become visible over the year of programming. We will share what we know about who came through our deflection program, what their needs and challenges were. We'll talk about key metrics and what services and opportunities was offered to individuals in our program. Also, throughout this presentation, we address the board's specific interests from the September Deflection Board work session. And now I will turn it over to Natalie.
Next slide, please. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Natalie Amar. I am Deflection Program Supervisor, and I'm happy to be here this morning to co-present with Anthony. What you're about to see in this presentation comes out of what we published in our annual report, which covers the period from 9/1/2024, when deflection first started, through 8/31/2025. Data collection and reporting have been integral to the program from the start. As you're aware, we've been reporting to the State Criminal Justice Commission as required by law and also as required by our grant obligations. We've also been producing quarterly reports throughout the first year, as well as some monthly data snapshots. This report differs from our prior quarterly reporting because it includes some analysis of trends, which we're excited to share with you today. Those trends have not been visible prior to now because there simply wasn't enough data to be able to analyze for them. I just want to note here that any information that was included in prior quarterly reports that has not been included in this special annual edition will be published in an upcoming supplement that should come out in a couple of months, and that will include all of the data for the fourth quarter. Next slide, please. The deflection program was established after the passage of House Bill 4002 in September of last year. That legislation allowed counties to offer a warm handoff to behavioral health services in lieu of arrest for possession of a controlled substance. And the deflection models that were applied across the state by counties have a significant amount of variation amongst them. So Multnomah County was one of 24 counties in the first year that opted to create a program. And in our county, it is an interagency leadership team that sets deflection policy. So what that means is that it is the leadership team that defines who is eligible for deflection, who establishes who can refer people into the deflection program, and what is required to complete deflection. From there, the program that we run is run out of Behavioral Health Division in the Health Department. And the program is responsible for operationalizing those policy decisions. So that includes things like data tracking and reporting, which also fall into the program scope. Based on the direction from the leadership team, deflection in Multnomah County has been offered through what's called a law enforcement intervention model, and that's been in place since the start. So that means that individuals can only be referred in by a law enforcement officer at a time where they otherwise could have been charged with a PCS charge. So keep in mind, as I present the numbers that you're about to see in the presentation, that we're really talking about a narrow subset of people with substance misuse or substance use disorder. It's not the general population. So these numbers reflect that subset that is eligible under the current criteria. Another point, just for context, is a lot of people think about deflection as identifying people through this process and then putting them into treatment. There certainly is a need to do that for folks that are in deflection. However, from the behavioral health lens, we really see deflection as the entry point into a recovery process, and that could look different for different people depending on their needs in the moment that they're deflected. So the program is really a connection with other services. And so as we make our way through this presentation, we'll talk about the motivation that we see in those that are being deflected and what we've been able to identify as the right approaches for meeting those individuals where they are. Next slide. Okay, so this slide really tells the story of a person that came to deflection following an encounter with law enforcement. The individual was a veteran, and when he came to the Pathway Center, he was identified following medical and substance use screenings to have several comorbidities as well as disabilities. He was not immediately interested in following up. He did he did complete the process of engaging with the program, but he wasn't immediately interested in accessing a service that was on the care plan that he received with a list of referrals. After talking with the care coordinator, he decided that he would opt in to go to sobering, which is available on site at the Pathway Center. During the hours that he stayed in sobering, he was able to continue talking with the care coordinator, and at some point in that time, he decided that he was interested in actually exploring some options for where he could go next. And after those conversations, he actually opted to go into detox. So when he came in, he wasn't motivated to do that initially, but after staying, resting, decompressing for a number of hours, he said, okay, I will take you up on the offer to get that connection. But his story doesn't end there for Deflection. After he went into detox, he was able to continue working with our Path Care coordinator to get an immediate placement into a residential treatment program. And all of that happened within the 30-day Deflection window. So this is an example of really the level of motivation that somebody comes in with. If it's a quick encounter, sometimes, you know, they don't have that initial motivation that's very strong. But now, as we build out the program and we have more options for folks, time can impact whether they're willing to take a next step in the immediate term. Also, the trained staff in this case from the PATH team, which is the county's Promoting Access to Hope program, really made a difference in helping to get this individual to the next step and to continue that conversation while he was willing to do so as part of his time in sobering. Next slide, please. So the slides that will follow, along with that client story that I just shared, are examples, or really will highlight the complex needs that individuals that come to Deflection have, right? And so we know that this board, and in particular Commissioner Jones-Dickson, expressed interest in understanding the populations at the board work session that was held in September. So we do want to speak to that. That's why we presented the client story, and it's why we're going to present some demographics for you now. These will represent just a selection of what's available in the annual report and what will be released in the supplement. Next slide, please. You're welcome. So this first slide just shows you kind of a snapshot of the overarching demographic categories that we are collecting information on, and I just want to say that we are required by the state to report on specific things, and we do that. It's worth noting, so you'll see we report on race, age, and gender identity. It's worth noting that we don't control the referrals in. We accept anyone that comes in, and we offer the support and services to anyone that walks through the door, but we don't actually influence, from the program standpoint, who does access the program. It's all based on those law enforcement referrals. So next slide, please. Housing status. So this graph really is consistent with what we've been reporting since the start of the program. Overwhelmingly, individuals that come to Deflection are experiencing houselessness. The categories that you see listed here correspond to those that we are required to report on by the state. So that's why they are named what they are. Those are just the categories in the database. But what this is really saying is that in some way or another, upwards of maybe even 90%, depending on how we count these categories, of individuals are houseless at the time that they come to Deflection. And so obviously a significant challenge faced by individuals who also need to, or that we would hope to support through a recovery process, right? Next slide, please. Another slide that speaks to the challenges that individuals are facing. So this slide is looking at the types of substances that are reported to be used by individuals in Deflection. You can see overwhelmingly it's fentanyl and it's methamphetamine, and I'll just add to what's on this graph, 52% of the clients served report to using a combination of fentanyl and methamphetamine. So folks are using substances that really impact them, that really will impact mental state of being, their physical state, and will, impact their experience when they arrive at the center. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to transition now into our overview of the trends and key metrics that we've observed in the first year of programming. Next slide, please. So as you'll see here, we saw a total of 606 referrals from law enforcement to the deflection program, and that represents 520 unique individuals. 392 individuals voluntarily opted to engage in the program. That is a 65% rate of engagement. When somebody engages in the program, that means they sign a release of information, they get medically screened, they get a substance use mental health screening, they meet with a case manager, and they receive a care plan with referrals to services, and referrals are actually made to those services for those individuals. A person successfully completes deflection if they access a service within their care plan within that 30-day window. And as you see here, we've seen 113 people do that. That represents 29% of the people that engaged. So that also means that 113 individuals in the course of this first year chose to take what we hope will be for them a first step in recovery. And then an interesting data point that we were able to pull for the annual report is that 81% of the people that completed did so specifically by accessing a SUD service. So that could be, and you'll see this in graphs to come in the presentation, but it could be treatment, detox, sobering, SUD-specific SUD peer services, so really something focused on substance use, as well as other supportive services. Next, sorry, I have a couple more points here. I jumped ahead of myself. In the September board work session, Commissioner Brim Edwards in particular was asking about what it meant to access a service. So I want to spend a moment to just clarify that. What that means is that an individual was referred to a specific provider and took all the necessary steps required to enroll in that particular service. So you can imagine some services might take months to complete. So if you're in some, an outpatient treatment program, you're not necessarily going to complete that in a few days or even in 30 days, right? But what we do know is that we can determine if someone enrolled, and each of those access points that you see has been verified by a care coordinator who has actually been in contact with the specific provider organization to make sure that the person is enrolled within those 30 days. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is something that is new that we're able to show now that we have a year's worth of data, and also now that the state Criminal Justice Commission has a database, a dashboard that shows a lot of interesting information about deflection on the state level. So this slide illustrates that Multnomah County's engagement and completion rate relative to statewide averages is actually a little bit higher than what you see as the statewide averages. So that 606 is our total number of referrals in. The teal bar shows the state average, the red line there on the teal bar shows the state average at 62%, and we are averaging at 65%. And then you'll see the yellow bar showing the state completion rate at 22%, and we are coming in at 29%. It's important to note here that the programs throughout the state are extremely varied, so it's really hard to do an apples-to-apples comparison. We can't really do that. But regardless, this does show that we are really in the range and even above the range of what is happening across the counties that did opt in at year one. Commissioner Brim Edwards, I want to acknowledge specifically a question that we received from you yesterday regarding 4 counties' specific deflection, completion, and success criteria. Again, I want to flag that the information requested about what those criteria are is available through the CJC dashboard on their website. And again, given the intricacies and variations across different county programs, CJC would probably be best placed to answer anything specific about other county programs, so I just want to offer that as a resource. Next slide, please. Okay, so Anthony opened his presentation with an important quote that talked about progress, and this is what we really want to show here in this slide, is there's been a lot of evolution of this program from where we began and where we are now, and it's not something that we expect will stop anytime soon. It's something that will be ongoing. But we're able now at year one to really show that progress. And I'll just highlight that what's shown on this slide is a snapshot of some key things that we've identified. What you'll find in the annual report is more detail with some more milestones that are also important. So we launched the program on September 1st of 2024, and we did that by offering field-based deflection very quickly. And we did that, by the way, as we brought online the center. So all of that work was happening concurrently, and then very quickly on October 14th, the center doors opened, and initially just for limited hours, with limited hours of access for individuals deflected. And then we went to 24 hours. And then in March, we expanded again by offering return visits, which were not an option at the beginning, so that folks during their window could come back and see a care coordinator if they needed additional support to access services during their 30 days. And then, of course, very importantly, sobering came online. And we are now running 24 hours for both deflection operations and sobering. So just to show how much has changed in the course of the year, and that's actually going to bring me to our, and one important thing I do want to flag here as well is that even after we opened, we continued to offer a field-based option through Gresham Police Department in collaboration with Fourth Dimension Recovery. Next slide. And so,
I want to cheer, but my voice is gone.
And then that brings us to the trends that we're seeing over year one. And you know, it's interesting because actually the trends correspond with a lot of the things that we did at different points in the year. So as you can see here, we've finally been able to analyze for trends across the year, across our key metrics. So you can see referrals are up, and here I really want to say here, because this is very important, because our referral partners are all law enforcement partners. So really, this is through a lot of work with them and collaboration and communication on a continuous basis to ensure that that trend continues on an upward trajectory. Client engagement also is higher. You know, I spoke to earlier about kind of what we're seeing people come in needing, and determining the best approaches to get people engaged and the right interventions for them. That impacts how likely it is for somebody to be engaged. So there's a learning curve there, and I think we've been seeing that improve. And completions have also been steadily going up. So that's something we're pleased to be able to show for this first year. Next slide, please. Okay. So now, service referrals that have been provided. So this slide shows, sorry, I just have to go back to my notes. Okay, so for this annual report, specifically in response to concerns expressed by Commissioner Brim Edwards in the work session from September that people were completing deflection potentially without accessing said services, we sought to present this data, which shows the types of referrals that are being made, as well as the next slide that you will see, which shows referrals access in a different way visually. So the kind of teal colored bars are showing referrals to SUD-specific services. And then the yellow bars are showing referrals made to other supportive services. And in this, as you can see here, you have a range of different, let's say, services that we'll put into the treatment bucket here. You'll see that overwhelmingly, right, outpatient treatment itself, just outpatient alone, comes in as the #1 referral provided, and then you have detox, but then inside that blue category, teal category of bars, you see other treatment categories for referrals as well. Next slide, please. And now we go to referrals access. So this slide shows the services that were accessed by the 113 people that completed deflection in the first year. And again, just as a reminder, accessed means that they went through the process of enrolling in the service per the particular provider requirements for doing that. So as you will see here, the vast majority of referrals accessed, so 81%, were to substance use and recovery support services, and those are the teal categories. And that includes 22% going directly into sobering services. And again, Commissioner Brim Edwards, I just want to take this opportunity to respond to a question that we received from you yesterday regarding the differences in how things are shown on the prior slide and this slide. So in the first slide, we deliberately broke out everything that counted as a treatment service so you could see the range of treatment options that people were being referred to. But here we consolidated because that way you could see just how much treatment access across all those categories, which include intensive outpatient, medication-assisted treatment, medication for opioid use disorder, and residential treatment, all lumped into that one treatment bar, so that you could see kind of how much that treatment access level was by those who completed. We can certainly provide that disaggregated by the other categories, so that's not a problem at all. We're happy to do that.
Yeah, since you raised my question, I'm going to speak to it. I just think if we are presenting information, here's what the referrals are. It's interesting what the consolidated data is, but I think most importantly is what is the disaggregated data. So each of those referrals, is nobody going to outpatient treatment or accessing it? So I hope that in the future we have, it's fine, we can have a summary slide, but that we actually just provide the data so that we can actually do a direct comparison.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's see, I'm just going to find my place, excuse me for one moment. Okay, so, all right, so there were a couple of other questions actually that you asked of us that we received yesterday that I just quickly want to address. We're going to get back to you with information about how many people went to withdrawal management, from withdrawal management into treatment. We were not able to analyze for that in the time that we had, but we will get back to you on that. And then you did ask another question about transportation data that is not in this report, and as I said at the beginning of this presentation, we will be publishing a supplement to what we did in the annual report that will include the data that was in the prior quarterly reports, including that transportation data.
Yeah, on the transportation data, again, that was part of the discussions with the neighborhood, and it's data we provided before, so it seems that it's a gap if
So
we're
Commissioner,
I'm sorry, she's directly.
No, I understand. We have, yeah, so this is information, and we will definitely have time for questions. We also have folks who are leaving early today, so I'm trying to make sure that we can get through the presentation so that folks may have time for questions.
So maybe we can wait for you to answer my questions till the end then, because it seems weird to have her tell me what the answers are and then I just sit here. So maybe wait till the end of the presentation, and when everybody else has a chance to ask their questions, answer the questions that I submitted.
I just appreciate how responsive staff is being to the questions that you asked when it's coming up in the slides. So I do want to appreciate all the effort that went in, even though the questions came in, just this week. So if you want to hold that, if that can work for you, that would be great.
Thank you. No problem. And in fact, we can switch to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, we've been piloting a continued field-based deflection model with 4D recovery out in Gresham, and it's a law enforcement intervention active outreach model, and there were 130 individuals. So those individuals are not included in the data that we report to the state because this was a pilot, and so we're adhering really to the criteria set by leadership in what we report as the overall numbers, but there were an additional 130 individuals that were enrolled through this pilot. And just in the last quarter, 4D was able to provide us with some data indicating that 14 people were able to be connected to same-day assessments in the last quarter alone through that. So next slide, please. Okay.
That's just last quarter.
That's just last quarter. That data, that's all that we have on that point. But it was so, it was good data, and we wanted to make sure that we shared that with this board. Okay. So this is getting into what's next for the program, and really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to respond a little bit to things that we heard come out of the last board work session. And so, so many of the interests that we heard from this commission regarded improving system coordination, enhancing client follow-up, and then policy changes that could expand access to deflection. So we've kind of categorized some of those things here. For example, regarding system coordination, we are in the process of modifying our care coordination workflows to be able to check the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS database, for deflected individuals who are houseless. So that is in the works right now. Our next steps that are underway are accessing the getting access to the database for the staff, and getting the staff trained on how to use the database. So that will allow for better coordination with housing case management for individuals that are houseless. And so we're moving that along and expect that to be done within 1 quarter. Additionally, we're working with and will continue to collaborate with housing providers and behavioral health resource networks providers around services, and to identify potential opportunities to better support clients and improve accessibility. Funding permitting, so now we're going to get into that second category that I know a number of commissioners were also really interested in hearing about. Funding permitting, we also do want to enhance client follow-up to services by providing client outreach during their deflection window, and if we can, after that. It's important to note that the program was not initially designed, and so doesn't currently have the capacity for long-term follow-up, but we do really understand and see the benefit of being able to do that and integrating that into what's available at the Pathway Center. But again, that depends on availability of funding for the particular outreach staff that we would need to be able to make that happen. House Bill 4002 leadership team is also considering policy changes that would expand access to deflection services, and that was highlighted in the annual report as well. So there are 2 pilots that we just launched on Monday, and that would actually allow greater access to the Pathway Center for Deflection. We're now piloting referrals by first responders through Portland Street Response, and through active outreach peers through the peer company. And we're looking over a 6-month period on how that works and what we can do, and then we can discuss with leadership team what the outcomes of those pilots were. The leadership team is also considering expanding eligibility criteria by potentially adding eligible co-charges. That is something that is happening in a lot of other counties around the state. And that's just currently in discussion stages, so no decisions made yet, but they would be low-level misdemeanor charges, and those recommended by the technical assistance that we receive from the CJC through that. So that's what's under consideration. Okay, next slide, please. Lessons learned for the permanent facility. So here we're looking at what we've learned and how that can inform programming decisions at the permanent facility. So what we see is that having sobering available 24 hours a day has made a really big impact, and that goes back to the client story that I shared with you earlier. So we know that having additional services available 24 hours will be significant. Withdrawal management and medication-assisted treatment services in particular. In addition to continuing 24-hour services, sobering services. We're also focusing on building partnerships with hospitals and other community providers and entities, building on those partnerships that we've developed over the last year so that we can be in a position to do more immediately when the permanent facility opens, and specifically around transitioning people to the next level of care. And finally, our model will include crisis stabilization services that will be available to those in need of those services for substance use and co-occurring mental health. And we are actively working to align those services with the new crisis stabilization rules that will be issued by OHA in the near future. Next slide, please. So this slide speaks to deflection funding. In October, the Criminal Justice Commission set the maximum funding level for the 25-27 biennium for Multnomah County at $6.67 million. The grant process is ongoing. So just yesterday, in fact, we submitted our budget proposal to the CJC. And that award decision is pending. It should come shortly, probably before the end of the year. The CJC grant is currently the only ongoing funding that we have for deflection programming, and the funding level based on that ceiling of $6.67 million is unlikely to cover the costs associated with all of the expansions that we would like to see put in place, but that's unlikely to be able to cover that cost. What we can share with the commission is that the current contract amount for the operator, which does 24/7 operations for both deflection and sobering at the Pathway Center, is about $1.8 million a year, so that's 3.6 over the biennium. The grant also covers all of our facilities costs, and those are fixed costs, right? So rent, utilities, other internal services, as well as our securities costs. Our current low-end estimate on that is about probably about 1.4 million on the low end, or 1.5. Yeah, about 1.5 million on the low end, right, for the next biennium, and then. So those two things together make up the majority of the budget, and then our county staffing is projected to remain roughly around 1.5 million, and again, that does include the required by statute coordinator position for deflection, data analyst, program specialist, senior, staff at the facility. So we currently have one care coordinator and another in recruitment. We have a recruitment process going on. And so that's the overall breakdown of how that grant funding for deflection is allocated. Next slide, please. And thank you. I just want to say again, we really appreciate the opportunity to bring this information to the commission, and would be happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Natalie and Anthony. Really appreciate this overview and all the details, and as well as sharing the report with the board, so that this was getting into some of the details, but there's a lot more in that annual report. I want to go to the board for questions, and I'm going to start with Commissioner Moyer because I know she has to leave a little early today.
I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. I think we've got a year now. I think that's a good reflection point. I'm concerned that this model fundamentally doesn't really work, and that the cost per person is extremely high for outcomes of less than 10% of individuals who go to deflection ever stepping in to any form of treatment. You don't have completion data, so I don't know how many people completed the treatment that they started, but it looked like 52 to 53 people out of 606 began any kind of SUD treatment, which included, no, that was treatment. It didn't include sobering, which I would not necessarily count as treatment. It does look, with the very limited amount of money that the field-based 4D approach might be having better connection results. Are we looking at redefining success, having a greater conversation about what it would take for us to be able to offer treatment on demand? And with an average of about 2 people, less than 2 people a day, why we're not physically taking them to whatever the next step is. I'll start with that.
I guess I can start. Those are real big questions. I guess when you're making a statement about sort of saying it's a failure, I guess it depends on what you're measuring. Like Natalie said, that this program was designed as a front door. They have many triage centers, referral centers across the United States that it's the front door to getting people into services, and once they move people into services, they consider that a success. So I think what people are asking for from its original design is something more. So what I would say is that for what we was designed to do, it's been successful in the context of the complex people that we are working with. Now, you asked about the treatment on demand. I think some of the things that you are talking about is what we are trying to do is that we don't currently have a system that's treatment on demand. We are currently trying to track, by the time we refer somebody, what is the amount of time to get them into that service? Because we know that they're not generally going to get into that service that same day. And we've been trying to work on that process of what you're talking about for many, many years. I think what people are asking for, it may be not necessarily because we're not the policymakers of deflection, but what people are asking for is a new design. And if you come up with a new design, then you would probably, if we get some of the resources that what people are asking us to do, then it would be, then we should see what would the results be then. I think we're measuring, we've been judged on a program that was not the design for what people are asking us to do.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. But I do think there is a difference and worth a policy conversation of what is expected of somebody who walks in on their own recognizance, exploring options to improve their life, and what level of engagement we should expect for that, and somebody being brought in lieu of a criminal charge. That is a very, very different scenario for me. And then the conversation of if we had a graduated scale of expectation, depending on the charge that they would be getting relieved from. I'm very interested in a world in which we can offer treatment on demand, which I'm fully aware that we cannot, but I feel really strongly that you don't get very many yes moments with people, and when you can't follow through at that moment, you may have lost that last yes chance. And so I'm pretty personally interested in a conversation of like, what is necessary for that to be a reality if somebody walked in, was brought by Portland Street Response or police and got to yes, how could we be that within hours? But also, you know, I hear a lot from my constituents feeling like we're spending a significant amount of the taxpayer dollars with not being able to make more than anecdotal case that we've substantively changed the direction of somebody's life. And so I guess again, I understand you did not make these policy choices, but in that context, just for hypothetical, what is missing? If we were to be able to do that, what is missing?
I give you two things. I think you're asking we've been asking for some additional support. We didn't get the money from the city. We asked for some additional support to do exactly what you're saying, the engagement strategy. The second part, when you're talking about treatment on demand, it would require more than what we can do as the county, because that requires a system change. That means that you would have to go out into the community, you would have to sort of assess like why assessments can't be done. It would require for us to sit in a big room of community partners, the state, and some of these other people that's responsible for that access to really get to it. I'm with you. If you want to be a thought partner, let's do it. Treatment on demand is something at least not even getting on treatment, but at least closing the gap about how long it takes someone to go in. Because you're right, when people are ready, having that access is really important for motivation. So I'm with you, just let me know when.
Today.
Starting in the district.
Right. And then just probably my last question is a look now at the different model of like the field-based 4D versus the center-based deflection center. What are some of the lessons learned from that we should be thinking about?
I think I'll speak to this. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. So there's a few differences, right? So what's great about the center and what we continue to see is really unique is really that it's there 24/7. So although it's not been as widely accessible as would be expected given the need in the community due to the particular eligibility criteria we're working within all of those factors, referral pathways in, but it's there and it's 24/7. And again, just to your prior question, the intention is once we're in the permanent facility, that then what will be available 24 hours will be far greater than what is currently available for 24/7. So that is very significant. Also, when people come to the center, they get medically screened. They can actually get they see the nurse, they get evaluated, they sit with somebody immediately on the spot. And so there are resources and services on site that are available there that although a field model, and I think as a program, we think that multiple things would be helpful to do. So it doesn't have to be one thing. This is the model we are operating in for all of the reasons previously stated, but it can be in addition to that we add things in. And part of the reason that we're piloting is we are constrained based on the policy set by leadership team, but we do want to see how much expanded access, how it would look, what could we learn from that. So we proposed to the leadership team to at least pilot and see if we could bring people into the center for specifically deflection, what might that look like after 6 months? And could that be a jumping point off which a policy change could happen? And so that was something that we did, we've been actively proposing options for consideration, and we continue to do that, and that includes the pilots, but also other things, many different ways that you could add on ways to get people into deflection and different types of populations, not necessarily just those that are encountered by law enforcement at that moment in their lives where they might otherwise face arrest, right? So I think that's a really important lesson for us, is that having multiple means is important, and also having things available somewhere at all times is really important.
Yeah, if I can just build off what she said, when I spoke to 4D Recovery earlier this week, they mentioned one of the benefits is that they have time, they have 20 hours to actually work through a plan or build out a plan with the Pathway Center. So that's been a game changer for the folks that are coming out of East County and folks that are looking for help or need help. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I just want to do a time check because we do have the general fund forecast coming up, so I'm going to keep an eye on times.
I have one quick last question.
Yep.
I did notice in one of your slides, and it was a little bit, I wondered what the origin was. With such a high percentage of individuals experiencing houselessness, I was surprised by the number of referrals to outpatient. Is there housing attached with that outpatient? I would assume it is incredibly hard to go through treatment while unhoused.
So the referral to outpatient sometimes is a referral to just get an assessment, and often some people go to residential because you can't usually go straight to residential to sort of get an assessment. Usually you go through outpatient, they do an assessment, you go in. So it could be some of that. And they do have outpatient program with supportive housing. There's quite a few programs with those out there. So it would be, you would have to look into what happened to that person after, which is what people are asking us to do.
Thank you. Commissioner Singleton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this presentation, and I think a lot of dialogue that continues to go on about this program pretty consistently. I'm going to pick up a little bit right where Commissioner Moyer left off. I appreciate the disaggregation of housing status, but it's 92% of people who access the deflection program are experiencing homelessness in some fashion, which is a huge percentage, and will bring me back to my ongoing question for this entire year that I've been here on what are we doing to connect folks to homeless services and into shelters. I see that there's a piece on the last slide about what's next around you all are starting to work in HMIS. Can you say more specifically what that means? Because I've offered a couple of recommendations and they're a little bit different.
I can start with some of it. One of it is that, like I said, the program was designed differently, and some of the things that you've been bringing to us is the bandwidth, just be honest, the bandwidth of the staff has been lacking. So the PATH team, when you talk about getting people into services, they had some access to getting people into services. So it doesn't show on that because it's part of the PATH team. A lot of times people are passed off to them. It's a wonky system that we're working at. What this is going to do is give access to the same thing that the PATH team is doing at the center, to give them access, work with when someone would come into the center, they'll be able to go into HMIS, look to see if that person has a case manager, and then connect with that person with the additional services. So if they went to outpatient treatment, hopefully they could try to coordinate them with housing while they're doing those type of services. So that is sort of the process that we're trying to get to, that sort of workflow, if that.
Yep, thank you. That's one of the things for sure. I think that's a huge step. The other is the by name list and being able to get information from folks to get them on the by name list if they're not already. Is that on the?
Yes, that was the other thing. I don't have them all in front of me, but I think your recommendations are being sort of done. We didn't put it all. I think some of it, I'm not sure. I got to remember, I'm getting old. But those things that you recommended are those things that I think the first process was that one I just named, and then putting them on those lists and working with the housing HSD for some of those other ones.
Thank you. I think, and some of this I look to the COO's office too, because that was where some of the work session conversation happened. To me, there were a number of follow-up steps that I don't think are just yours to do. One was convening our clean and sober shelter providers to actually have a conversation with you all about referrals into those programs, so that instead of cold shelter referrals, they had specific slots and could be in a clean and sober environment to support their recovery. The other was to talk about how staff could either be trained or come on site to do assessments around coordinated access, so that while somebody's there, they're actually getting assessed for permanent supportive housing. I would add to that list, Anthony, you just mentioned people have to go to outpatient for an assessment before they can get into inpatient. That's bananas. Is there a way that we can actually bring people on site? And that might be a bigger conversation, but how do we stop having people have to go to multiple places to get their needs met? They're already in county services. What can we bring to them is really my critical component. And what I'll say there is part of why I'm pushing this so hard is, to me, it's an opportunity to leverage services. I hear you all. We don't have the staff capacity to do all the things, but I am very convinced that so many of the folks you all are serving are being served by other county services, and that if we don't figure out how to wrap around that person, we're going to continue to create siloed systems as opposed to the wraparound supports that the people actually need. So again, this is not yours to fix, but it's why I keep harping on this piece around particularly homeless services when we see that 92% of folks are in that category. So I'm gonna keep pushing that. I am happy to get into the weeds with you. You know I will sit with you and go into HMIS and show you exactly what I wanna see. So let's please keep working on that. And I look to the COO's office to kind of move some of these pieces forward. I think the shelter component is a huge low-hanging fruit that we should take advantage of, because the minute we stop having the deflection center feel like another revolving door, the minute we get more support and buy-in from all of our partners, and I think the ability to move further on what I've heard from some folks on the leadership team about wanting to add additional charges to be deflection eligible. We can't get there if everyone's just coming in and out of the program right now. So that's, to me, kind of that big next step so we can move on to those bigger policy questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Brim Edwards.
Yes. So I appreciate going third, just to build on the comments from the other commissioners. I'm going to have just a slightly different perspective since I was here at the very beginning in the opening of the center. I think we do need an improved model and a reassessment of the definition. When I go back to sort of just the early conversations that were had about deflection, and what was communicated broadly was deflection from jail, and I think from that perspective, we've been successful. But I think the explicit and implicit also promise was it was going to be deflection into a path to treatment and recovery, and I don't think our model, while it starts there, the data doesn't show, at least the data that we have to date, that we are getting people along that pathway. I feel very strongly we need more than a front door, because the front door just becomes a revolving door if people are just coming in. I do think that's why, from talking to first responders and law enforcement, of people are just coming in and just cycling out, that less likely to take the time to drop somebody off. I'm going to share again a concern that I've shared from the very beginning, that there are decisions being made about the program design and what success is that are being made in private by the leadership team, and those conversations need to come into the public, because we need to hear the divergent points of view so that we can, I believe, build on the foundation that we have and get better outcomes for the individuals who are going into decisions. And I feel like when those decisions are being made in private and not in public, we don't hear all those perspectives, and we don't get to pressure test what's happening. So I would call on the chair that those meetings need to be open and available to both commission and the public to hear what the back and forth is, and what the data is saying, and what our partners are recommending, so that we can get better outcomes. I also am really concerned, since I was here at the very beginning and also worked to get $25 million from the legislature, that we've invested a huge amount of money in this first phase. And if I look at it, it looks like we've had about 600 people going through deflection, which is an average of about 2 people a day. And it's just, we're in a period of time that we, like, for the individuals who need services, and because we have limited resources, we have to just use that money more effectively. Like 2 people a day can't, for the millions of dollars we spent, just can't, we can't continue with that. I'm also concerned about the sobering beds. We know they're needed. It looks like in September, there were only usage of 15 beds over the entire month. And so the question we should be asking is, why aren't those being utilized? Because we know that first responders were saying that that's the alternative to jail, ER, or leaving people on the streets, which is why I asked the question about, I'm going to go back to my questions. I asked the questions about what are the other large counties doing, because I think we should be benchmarking. I think we can't say our program is better, like we're above average or we're getting similar results to other programs when, as we've discussed, those programs are very different. And I do think we should be benchmarking it. Are other counties actually getting people, deflecting them out of jail and into treatment? And I guess I could go look at the website, which is, I guess, the response to my question, which I will do. I do think the leaders of this county should be looking at whether our success is actually success, because I think if we've designed success in a way that we can say and pat ourselves on the back that things are better than other places, but other places actually have different programs that maybe are more rigorous or actually getting people into treatment, then we should be looking at that. And I think it's a good exercise for all of us to go through. So some of the questions that did not get answered as part of the presentation, I asked about the client story on page 5, which I think is exactly what we want to have happen. So I appreciated that. But if you look at the data, it appears that that is sort of maybe an aberration or an exception versus everything else. So my question was like, how many people share that same journey, which is they show up for sobering and then they decide because of the interaction they had that was positive that they're ready for withdrawal management and then they're ready for treatment. So.
I'm just going to answer it honestly. I don't know, but I just want to talk about the term success when we talk about substance use disorder. Even when people go to treatment, if you look at the research, the success rate in outpatient treatment is somewhere around 28%, even if you do the rigorous, those things. Addressing substance use disorder is very complex, and it's not we saying that our program is better. It's just that all we're saying is this is what we are doing, and what we're doing is trying to improve our program to get people into those services. And when you look at outpatient treatment traditionally, most people don't generally go from point A to point B into treatment. Usually is a whole bunch of things that has happened before they get there. The second thing to sort of to have people be aware of, is that you can't measure success based on one event. Matter of fact, when you look at a long-term study of people just having any engagement in any therapeutic interaction opposed to someone not having it, the success rate becomes greater with the more contact they have with any type of therapeutic contact. So even if they are engaging with someone who's trying to help them get better, the more engagement they have with that over time, you measure success over time, not in these one-off, right? So even you want to get people in treatment because the likelihood, even if they even have some part of treatment and they jump out of treatment, the likelihood of them going back to treatment in a shorter amount of times become greater. And then I think when we talk about success, we should look at like what we are trying to measure and what our goals are. And I agree with you a lot in what you say about what our goals could be in Multnomah County to improve the very things that you are asking for. But it's the whole idea of looking at other programs and measuring against, I don't know what theirs are. And a treatment measurement is not maybe necessarily a right one, or whether someone goes to outpatient treatment or residential treatment as a form of success. It's successful that they got in, but what is it what is the long-term impact of that? Is, I think, what we're trying to get to.
This
I
is,
think we're both-
and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
Okay, no,
I
I'm
know-
good.
I know the
I
chair
was
is going to limit
long-winded.
my amount of, just because of what we've got
I
on
was
the agenda.
long-winded, I'm sorry.
But this is exactly why the leadership team discussions need to be in public. Because the definition of success was formulated in a private meeting behind closed doors without that give and take. And actually, now that we're 1 year in, this is the perfect time. Like, what are other counties doing? Have we set the right measure of success? Not the measure of success of what we're doing, but like, are we being successful for the individuals who are trying to help? And I ask the question because, not because I don't understand that there's many measures of success, but the example was given of like, here's this, I was inferring that that example was given as like, here's a success. So I was just asking, like, how many other cases did somebody go from sobering to treatment? And you can give me the answer afterwards, but that's why I was asking it, because it's like, this is success. And it's like, it's great, I love it. But like, how many, it doesn't seem to be the experience of most of the individuals. I asked some questions about costs. I'm going to get that from Tracy, but again, we've made a huge investment, and I'm concerned about the ongoing run rate with the number of people we're serving. I'd love the transport data away. Again, that was something in the Good Neighbor Agreement that we talked about, and again, I think we just have to consistently provide that data, because it's also did we transport them to the next step? We've heard over and over again that's a key piece, versus them just walking out the door. I asked for the disaggregated data going from referrals to access, because again, I think that allows us to dive down, like, are there referrals that nobody's going to? That would be good to know. Or are there ones that are actually moving people along the continuum, which would also be good to know. But it's hard when they're clumped together or consolidated to get that. You've given me information on the 2 pilots. I appreciate that. On slide 19, and I think this is similar to the question that Commissioner Moyer asked, is like, does anybody who want withdrawal management, are they able to get it immediately? Like, have we worked out with our partners that when somebody says, I'm ready to go into withdrawal management, that we can get them in? Or are we still sending them to a line the next morning?
So I think it varies is the answer. So it really depends. It depends when when they present at the center. It depends what's available. I mean, it's really case by case, so I don't know that I have a great answer for that. What I can say is, again, as I responded to Commissioner Moyer earlier, the idea is that we are going to have that on demand 24/7 once the permanent facility opens, which will alleviate a lot of the challenges that we have now, where we just have to work with what's out there in the community. So that is actually something we very much look forward to being able to offer on demand 24/7 when somebody comes, if they want it.
The current opening date, though, the permanent center is not till 2027?
I think that's right, yes.
So over a year from now. So the Pathway Center is open 24 hours a day. The data shows we've had about 600 people, so that's less than 2 people a day. Is that right?
I don't know exactly how that calculation shakes out, because you have to consider that, we did field base at the beginning, and then as we showed in the trend slides, things have changed. So I'd say probably around April, we started to see those referrals really start to pick up. So it's trending upwards is, I guess, a way to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, in order to effectively spend taxpayers' dollars well, and I think utilize it to optimize it to help individuals, I mean, we should be looking at, our dashboard should have like daily census data, because when you look at it, if I look at 600 people over a year's time, we spent millions of dollars, it's like, what's happening the other 23 hours of the day in the center? What are those individuals doing when there's nobody there?
One point that might be worth noting here is that this also is where sobering happens. So none of the sobering programming is reflected in, other than in its intersection with deflection, none of that is actually showing up here. So the center also does offer that through, as you well know, other referral pathways in, so.
Well, the data on the sobering is also pretty disappointing in that, you know, we know if you just walk anywhere in the city that those beds could be full all the time. There's 11 beds. And it looks like in September there were 15 usage of the beds over the whole entire month, which is maybe 1.5 bed used a day. So I'm just saying, we should be tracking that data and like, how could, we know there's a need, like how do we move that? Which will get me to my next point is, and this is again, I hope in our next work session that we have a discussion about if we're going to open things up, obviously we need to talk with our partners about, you know, whether there will be other charges, how do you open it up? But if we don't fundamentally, if we open the front door wider, but there's nothing behind it, then I think we're just going to have more people coming through the front door that aren't getting services or aren't getting on their pathway. And I think we have to be thoughtful about it, and we have to look at the data. And you're going to answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to do a time check, though, because I want to make sure that we have enough time for Commissioner Jones-Dixon questions before we have to move on to the general fund forecast.
Okay, I have one more question after, but you look like you're going to answer.
No, it's okay. Well, do you want, okay. I was just, the only thing I'll briefly add is that I think really, I'd say that the pain point right now is actually the referrals in, which we're exploring ways with the means that we have available to be able to increase those numbers. We have limited means available to us based on a variety of constraints, both on the deflection side and on the sobering side. But again, as I said, one of the important things to note is the trend, because the trend, I think, is a reflection of the effort, right? So we're not where, and this goes back to Anthony's point at the beginning, we're not where we started, but we're not where we need to be either. And I think we just continue to take the feedback and we continue to attempt to open up that access. And then once people are in, I think we've been very much learning lessons on how to improve engagement. And, you know, the presentation did speak to some of this, but it will change as services, because, so there's evolution to continue happening. And that's all I'll say there.
Right. And I do want to move on to Commissioner Jones-Dixon, just because.
You know, last time when we had a conversation about deflection, we were told that staff wasn't going to come. So this is our chance to, and then we were like told, this is the meeting we get to ask about deflection.
I just have 2 questions.
Okay.
So I'm almost done.
I just want to be fair to all the commissioners.
Well, I'm just, somebody directed staff not to come to the last work session, and that this was going to be the work session, this was going to be the time that we could ask questions, so.
Yep, and you've submitted your questions and they're working on them. So if you want to put it on the record, that's fine. I just want to make sure that we have enough time for everyone to speak, and that we have enough time for the general fund forecast that's coming up, which is scheduled to take an hour.
Okay. In terms of trends, if the trends are changing, we didn't get that data. We just got, here's what happened over the year. So if we had very few at the beginning, but the last several months, if you could give us like monthly trend data, that would be helpful if it actually is changing. And then the last question I had was actually a question for you, like when the last time the leadership team met, and will you open the meetings to the public and to the commission? Because I feel like that is where program design is happening. And if we're going to get different outcomes and have a different program design, then that's a forum in which it needs to be public, because decisions are being made.
Yes, so I don't remember what we have a meeting about once a month, so we had our last meeting last month. The people who are sitting at the table for the House Bill 4002 leadership team meeting are the people who are outlined in statutes as having been the state legislature has put those, folks at the table to represent the different needs across the spectrum as we're talking about deflection as a policy choice by the legislature in terms of having pathways with the recriminalization of drugs. So
legislature didn't say
I'm
those
sorry,
meetings were
please do
were
not
private.
interrupt me, Commissioner Brim Edwards. You've asked me a question and I'm responding to it. So, and just like every single other county in the state, the conversations that are happening with the House Bill 4002 leadership team meetings are happening among those people on a regular basis as we're making decisions as the legislation says. I've reported out on updates and things that are happening here in our board meetings, as well as in updates and check-ins with commissioners. I'm happy to continue to share that information. As I said at our last work session, the House Bill 4002 leadership team meeting has all agreed that, that 1 year is a really important point for us to be taking a look at the eligibility requirements and what measures of success. And that we are looking at updating and potentially expanding those if we can get to agreement. So that is the way that we've been operating. That's the way that I think we will continue to operate so that we can have those really frank conversations. And again, bringing the information about those conversations here to this meeting so that the updates and outcomes can be public. And I think that, yeah, I mean, so that's what I will say to that.
I would just say that the statute doesn't say that those meetings are private, and I feel they're very important policy decisions being made. And I also understand from talking to individuals on the leadership team is that they may have different points of view than you're expressing in the meeting, and that it's important for us to hear those other points of view so that we can make informed decisions.
So what I am reporting out on are the success metrics and the eligibility requirements that, as a group, that the leadership team is getting behind. And so those are the things, like we're in conversations right now. I will say, like, when we first started these conversations to where we are now, there have been some people, there have been people who have changed on there, and so positions may have changed, but we are actively engaged in the conversations about what constitutes, like, who should be eligible to come through deflection, how we are measuring success of those folks, and then also looking at how do we, some of the same things that this board is contemplating in terms of how do we take advantage of the resources that are available through deflection, through the funding, through the Criminal Justice Commission and the state legislature that is actually paying for the deflection program here at the county. How do we take advantage of that through things like expanding pilots? So we have had 2 pilots that have just started. There was an email that went out about that. So looking at how we can continue to improve the program. I think where this board, the insights of this board are going to be especially important are when we're talking about that, okay, the deflection, the eligibility, the success requirements are kind of there, but how do we make sure that all of the connections, like to Commissioner Singleton's points, for the way that the county is able to reach in and share information and access services, like how are we making sure that we are funding successfully the additional parts of this program that this board wants to see? For instance, the longer term tracking of people who have gone through deflection. That is not something that the state is looking for, but that we've heard from the board. So I think that all of those, like the parts of the program that are from when somebody is, within then the county services part of the program and what that looks like and how that can be the most successful is really, like, the points of this board are very valuable, and as well as, like, helping to inform me, and I said this during our last work session, about showing up and engaging in those conversations at the leadership table for successful deflection and eligibility.
So I have no idea if what the commission has said actually reaches the leadership table. And the things you're talking about are policy decisions, and they're also going to be budget decisions, and doing it behind closed doors is a disservice, I think, to the county. And I think the results show that we have to be having a model switch or model improvement to get better outcomes, and those conversations have to be in public.
Can I offer, so that we don't continue to take time here, because I think we knew that the first deflection work session wouldn't be the only. My proposal is that we continue to work on the next deflection work session. I did send just some of the follow-up that I had from our notes, and also appreciate your staff for sending those out. Sent to the COO's office. They're going to work on a status update, but I think we build on that with the next work session and bring in some of these policy pieces that you're talking about.
I think it's a great idea, and I think it'll be absolutely important that we have all the relevant staff here, both the budget staff, and I really, you were their experts to have the health department staff who are running the program, but we need to have everybody at the table. I think that's an excellent suggestion.
Yeah, and we already have a work session scheduled for December 9th. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Jones-Dixon.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nellie, and Director Jordan for the presentation, and the rest of the team. Mark, I see you, and Director Banks as well. One of the things that I'm reminded of is just a presentation that you gave, Director Banks, back in 2024, as far as we're trying to build a system of care, a reflection system, and it looks like that's what we're doing here. I just have questions around just slide 18. Just would like to know just the exact quarters or dates. You know, the improving system coordination, enhanced client follow-up. Are we talking about quarter 1, quarter 2? Just that would be helpful. And then the funding permitting, I know you mentioned OHA, and are you talking about funding from us, CJC? That way we can get on board as far as the various things that we need to be advocating for moving into, just moving forward in general. In addition to that, the questions I have is just feedback from the folks that are in our care, so the completions. Are we receiving, are we soliciting, or are we getting feedback from folks that have actually completed the process? Also, are we getting feedback from folks that are dropping or just leaving or not re-engaging? The reason why I asked that, I met a gentleman out in Troutdale and just by the name of Grizzly yesterday, and he said the ball keeps on getting dropped, like people leave jobs and things like that. So similar to what Commissioner Singleton mentioned, like we have all the services here. That's one of the reasons why I've been advocating for like basic technology, like how do we bring everything in-house and it's fail-proof so we can actually see where folks are dropping off and closing those gaps. I'm extremely encouraged by just to work with 4D Recovery and the partnership with the police department as well, hearing directly from Tony and hearing just the success, primarily just being able to have a place where folks can go to get help or get rest, and then at the same time having time to build out a plan has been great, and we're looking to build on top of that. So both with them and then the other providers that are out in District 4, and we're always open to pilot new things. So we're here. Thank you again. I know it's a huge lift, but we're modeling the behavior. Like, what does it look like to truly, relentlessly pursue our most vulnerable and create a space where folks can just work through their stuff. So thank you again. Yeah.
Great. And I want to just thank both of you as well as the entire team that is working on this. This has been really incredible work by county staff over the last year and several months to get this up and running, and I'm just very impressed by the way that you guys have managed to deliver on what's been asked of you, but also like being responsive and creative in your thinking, and the proposals that are bringing forward that are helping to guide decisions about this in terms of both, you know, the path forward for this, the conversations that are happening now about what this program could actually be, and most importantly, how we can have the biggest impact on the folks in our community who really need these services. And I also just want to recognize that, you know, the parts of the system that you can control, you guys have been incredible. You made incredible efforts and done incredible work on this, and the way that you have shown up and partnered with the other folks within the systems that are leading into this. And I just want to recognize that those partnerships are incredibly important, because both when we look at, you know, again, what was decided is the type of deflection, which is the law enforcement-enabled deflection, that really set parameters around how people could walk through the doors and kind of the limits on that existing system on bringing people in. And over the last several months, over the last year, we've really looked at how we can continue to open that door wider and have more pathways. And I just want to acknowledge that, you know, now we have providers who work closely with law enforcement able to bring folks in. We have other first responders who are able to bring folks in. And really, you know, trying to see how we can serve that. And then I think the way that you've been leveraging the investments with the 24-hour sobering to provide access to people to get them to that place, as the testimony that you shared today was about, like really seeing how those system connections are incredibly important to folks moving forward, and we need more of that. We know that detox is not available, withdrawal management is not available 24/7. So if somebody is coming into the deflection center at 2 a.m., they can't immediately get there, but hopefully, that we are able to do that. I just wanted to, because I think this was brought up before, I know that in one of the last deflection meetings that we had, it was shared that there are additional pathways, like we do have those relationships within the detox, so it's not just about like 9 a.m., but we are able to get them at other times of the day too. So again, those partnerships have been really incredibly important, and I want to thank you for that. I think also what this conversation and what I hear, from this board as well as for folks in the public is like, we know that there are still many gaps in our larger behavioral health system, whether it comes to workforce or infrastructure accessibility. But the work that we are making along with our partners for this system, as well as the connections to the larger system, are incredibly important. I wanted to just make a note, though, that like one of the things here that is going to enable us to really make those connections to the system is the efforts and is the investments that our partners are going to be putting in. And so I just want to reiterate, we do need our partners, for instance, at the City of Portland, to be stepping up with the investments of the $1.9 million for sobering that was originally committed to, and we haven't received that over the last couple of years, because we want to make sure that the investments that we're making, we're able to continue those and to continue to have those connections to the larger system. So just appreciate all the work. We know that deflection is leading more people to getting to the right care and away from our justice system in a way that is helping them get on the path to safety, health, and recovery. And we want to be expanding that. And the last thing I just want to say is I appreciate you, Anthony, and also you, Rachel, who has been saying this since the beginning of these conversations, centering us on what the pathway to recovery looks like and how it looks differently for each person. And I think that aligns with the updated definition of success that was in the last piece of legislation just passed in this short session by the legislature, or by the long session by the legislature in House Bill 3069, that really defines success. Successful outcome means an outcome that recognizes that recovery pathways are necessarily individual and that is measured in engagement in case management services and improvements in quality of life stability factors and public safety. And that is something that we have been aiming for and have been aligned with and will continue to do so. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
All right, Tasia, can we move on to R3?
R3, informational briefing on the FY 2027 General Fund 5-year forecast.
All right. So today's forecast really is, you can think of as the kickoff to our FY 27 budget cycle. I know this board, our county employees, and the community are paying attention to learn more about what's on the horizon for fiscal year 2027 and beyond. I want to thank Christian, Jeff, and the entire budget team for all the work that you've done to make the county's budgeting forecast informative and useful for us as we face some really tough decisions about where to best allocate our resources in order to achieve the outcomes we want to see in our county. With that, I will turn things over to you to take us away. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. For the record, while Tasia brings the presentation up, I'm Jeff Renfro from the Budget Office. I use he, him pronouns.
Good morning. Christian Elkin, County Budget Director. I use she, her pronouns, and I am here to support Jeff.
If we could go to the next slide, please. So normal agenda today, we're going to talk the big picture, then we'll go into our specific revenues and expenses, and then finish up with some housekeeping. If we could go to the next slide, please. So we're going to start with the most important piece. So these are our assumptions for the 5-year forecast. When we left you in the spring, we thought that fiscal year 2027 would be more or less balanced. But our starting point for this budget cycle is going to be a $10.5 million deficit. The reason for the change are several changes that on their own were relatively small, but they were all kind of moving in the wrong direction. So I'll get into all of this in more detail in a bit, but we made our assumption for assessed value growth in 2027 a little bit worse. We made our assumption for compression a little bit worse. We made our assumption for BIT growth a little bit worse, And then the COLA we had assumed would be 2.75%, and we're now assuming it's going to be 3.3% for 2027. Those four things together add up to about a $10 million deficit. As we look into the out years of the forecast, our assumption for assessed value growth going forward is basically right on that 3% floor that we need additional development to get ourselves up above. And then I've also pretty significantly reduced the growth assumption for BIT as we kind of start to hedge against the possibility of some economic contraction. And then the cost of living adjustment and our increase in personnel costs we're assume continue to come down, but just not quite to the level of that puts us on a more sustainable path due to some kind of stickiness in the inflation numbers that we're seeing. The number gets worse in 2030 because that's when our benefit from our PERS surplus that we brought into the system runs out and we lose that offset. Last year we'd assumed that would happen in fiscal year 2028, but due to some decisions made by the PERS board, that's pushed out to 2030. And then things get better in 2031 because we will have finished paying off our PERS bond. So right now, there's a 4.85% on all base wages for employees that we charge and then collect to pay debt service on that bond. When that's done, that'll be a really significant reduction in our expense growth for that year. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So big picture, nationally, there's slowing employment growth. And in fact, the latest employment numbers didn't come out because of the government shutdown. But Goldman Sachs announced this week that they think there was actually a reduction in the total number of jobs nationally by about 50,000. Prices, tariffs, and interest rates continue to create a huge amount of uncertainty. There are some official measures of economic uncertainty that economists use. As the tariffs were first implemented, it was at a level similar to the beginning of the pandemic. It's come down, but the level of uncertainty is still much higher than what we typically expect. Locally, we're seeing declining employment and then a very low level of development. I'm on an advisory group for the city's permitting bureau, and we met last week, and that data continues to be pretty grim. Every time that group meets, we keep kind of pushing out our assumption for recovery in the development environment by another 6 months or so. At this point, even the land use review permits, which are the very first thing someone does if they're considering a new development, are at extremely low levels. So even if those picked up tomorrow, it would take several years for any new development to actually show up on the property tax roll for us. And then the last one, Echo Northwest has put out a lot of work around this just recently, but when you look at metro areas across the country, the Portland metro area is really underperforming a lot of the rest of our major metro areas. We're one of 5 metro areas that are consistently losing jobs. Then when you disaggregate the Portland metro area, Multnomah County and our job declines are really what's driving what's going on in the metro area as a whole. Clark County is overperforming quite a few of the metro counties across the country. So it really is an issue centered here in Multnomah County. If we could go to the next slide, please. One more. So a quick overview before we jump into some of the specifics on our major revenue sources. We aren't making huge changes for the current year. We're not changing property taxes, even though assessed value came in a little bit lower than I thought and compression was a little bit higher. We'd incorporated an assumption of the revenue impact for the new TIF districts. So the assumption I incorporated was a little bit too high, and that basically offset where we missed in other places. U.S. Marshal beds, our current assumption is that we would use 15 beds on average per night. We're reducing that to 12. As a reminder, a few years ago, we were at about 95. So we continue to just true up that estimate based on the data that we see. We're reducing our assumption for liquor and cigarette related revenues. Liquor revenues had been higher than the historic trend coming out of the pandemic, and they've sort of slowly started to drop. And at this point, I think I've seen enough in the data to assume that drop is permanent. And then cigarette revenue, that's really a small true up that continues to drop year after year, I think based on efforts to reduce smoking. The number down on the bottom, we're increasing our interest assumption for the current year by $3 million. So our interest assumption, I work really closely with Eric and our treasury team. So there's some complexity here because there's kind of what's happening with interest rates nationally. And then our treasury team is making investments on a short, medium, and long-term ladder, they call it. And so even if interest rates change today, how that flows through to the interest we're actually collecting depends on kind of how it hits us in our purchasing cycle for those investments. So based on where we ended up last year, where we are right now, we think we need to bump up the interest assumption, but in the out years of the forecast, it remains unchanged. So overall, we're increasing the current year forecast by $2.2 million. That number is going to come back at the end when we talk about one time only. As a reminder, our goal is to be within 2% of what we assumed when we adopted the budget. So right now, we're just about a quarter percent above what we had assumed. If we want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is like the one piece of good news in our property tax section. So this is year over year housing price changes for residential properties in Portland. So residential property is about 60% of our total assessed value. So really what's going on with residential properties is mostly going to drive our property tax assumptions. Growth in values for residential properties locally aren't great, but they're not bad either. It's just kind of like continuing to chug along right in the middle there. So as long as residential properties continue to hold their value, we're not doing great for our property tax revenue growth, but it doesn't really turn into like an emergency until we start seeing some weakening here, and we just continue to not see that. If we want to go to the next slide, please. So we're going to come back to the slide we showed you last year just to remind you of a few things related to our property tax system before we talk about office properties. So as a reminder, there's several different values that we care about in the property tax system. Real market value is what like a normal person cares about. It is an approximation of the value that you could actually sell the property for. Then there's also a value called the maximum assessed value. That is a synthetic value created by Measure 50. And what it is it's our 96, 97 value of a property minus 10%. And that line is allowed to grow by 3% per year. So then assessed value, which is the value that we apply our tax rate to, the one that we actually care about, is defined as the lower of real market value or maximum assessed value. So under normal circumstances, the vast majority of properties in Multnomah County have a real market value much, much higher than maximum assessed value. So usually, before the pandemic, I just used assessed value and maximum assessed value interchangeably. What we're seeing on especially some of our office properties that have had really significant declines in real market value, is the real market value has gone down so much it's punched through that maximum assessed value line, so then it's pulling assessed value down with it. So with that context, if we could go to the next slide. So this is the total real market value, assessed value, and compression for all properties in Multnomah County. Real market value is on the top. When I made this graph last week, there wasn't the final data point, but today I saw that DART has put that information out. So real market value in the last year in total grew by about 0.5%. So if I added that data point to the top, it would be basically flat. Assessed value looks like a pretty straight line, but if you look starting in 2023, there is a little kink in it as the rate of growth for assessed value starts to slow. And then compression has picked up in the last couple of years. So compression is a function of real market value. Your compression cap is a percentage of your real market value. So as real market values fall, we would expect compression to go up. I haven't talked about it much in these presentations just because I'm trying not to like overwhelm everyone. But it is something that we are continuing to watch, and it is like eating into our property tax revenue growth. I think of compression as being basically transitory. So at some point in the future, real market values will recover. They'll take that compression cap up with it, and compression will go back to normal. Some of the changes to assessed value we're talking about are going to be basically permanent. So with that, if we could go to the next slide. So this is an update on a graph we showed you last year. So this was our top 20 office buildings by pre-pandemic value. You'll see that we're missing property number 1 because between 24 and 25, that property was split into multiple tax lots. So we pulled it off. So it looks similar to the way it did last year, but it's just a little bit worse. So the blue bar is the 2019 real market value. The orange bar is the 2025 real market value. Basically, all of these buildings are on the tax rolls worth less than half, and in some cases, considerably more than that relative to their pre-pandemic value. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is where that actually then flows through and starts to impact our property tax collections. So this is the real market value for those same buildings for 2025 in orange, and then the assessed value in 2025 in gray. So as a reminder, if the gray and the orange bars are equal to each other, that means that real market value has fallen below maximum assessed value, and it's pulling assessed value down with it. 2 years ago, there were 3 buildings that were in that state. Last year, there were 8 of them. You can see now it's almost all of them. And then I'd like to draw your attention to the short one over on the left side. It's property number 4. So that one, the real market value is, I think, less than 10% of what that building sold for in the recent past. But the assessed value is still quite a bit lower than the real market value. So what's happening there is typically under our property tax system, a property owner is doing everything that they can to avoid triggering reassessment, right? So they're probably getting a pretty good deal. Their real market value is much higher than assessed value. So if you trigger reassessment by making a significant investment or a significant change to your property, that's almost certainly, under normal circumstances, going to raise your assessed value. What property owners are starting to figure out now is that if you trigger reassessment with these much lower values, then that locks in that lower assessed value, right? And so that permanently lowers that maximum assessed value line. So what is happening here is even if real market values start to recover, if that lower maximum assessed value line is locked in, then we will be left with these lower assessed values permanently until something happens on that property to trigger reassessment again. We're starting to see that happen with multiple properties. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so moving on from property taxes, we'll talk about the BIT. So this is a graph of total US corporate profits nationally. So this is really highly correlated with our BIT collections. So the way a company comes up with their BIT payment is they look at their net income for their whole operation. Net income, the easiest way to think about that is profits. And then they assign a certain percentage of those total profits to Multnomah County. For almost all businesses, that's going to be based on the percent of their sales that happen in Multnomah County. And then they take that percentage of the profits that are assigned to Multnomah County, they apply the 2% rate to it, and that's how they pay us. Because if we want to go to the next slide, please. Because our collections are so highly concentrated amongst a relatively small number of businesses, I'm really looking at what's happening nationally and what's happening to the profitability of very large companies more than I'm looking at kind of the profitability of smaller companies that operate locally. So as a reminder, this is the share of payments by tier of company. So that blue line on the bottom is the percentage of our total payments that are contributed by our top 10 payers in any of these years. So you can see it's typically between 15 and 20% of our total BIT collections come from 10 firms. And then the orange line on the top is the contribution by our top 300 payers. So it's declined a little bit, but typically about half of our payments are going to come from our top 300 payers. In total, in a typical year, we have about 45,000 payers. And then we have maybe 90,000 or more who the city kind of has on record who potentially would have to pay us or need to file a return that says that they're exempted because their revenues weren't high enough to actually trigger the tax payment. So total collections, it's really just a small fraction of the total number of businesses that are contributing to this. If we could go to the next slide, please. So on that note, for 2026, our collections are currently running ahead of where we expect it to be by a healthy amount. That is almost exclusively due to an extremely large payment by one company. So it's good for our collections this year, but it feels precarious if we are so dependent on one company. If our collections for the year come in where I expect them to be, then that payment will account for about 10% of our total collections. So if we took that payment away, or even if we just assumed that it was in line with the previous highest payment we'd ever received, we'd be basically right on track. It suggests that maybe aside from that company, there's like a little bit of weakness that we're seeing in the collections. But overall, I expect us to be on target for our assumption for the current year. And then going forward, based on kind of where we are in this year and what we're seeing in the data and what companies are saying about profitability and those expectations in their quarterly earnings reports, I expect us to continue to grow at a more or less normal level in fiscal year 2027. And then we've reduced that assumption in 28 and beyond. And really what a lot of these larger companies are saying in their official filings is that we have done everything we can to avoid passing the impact of tariffs on to our customers, and we've hit our limit about what we can do related to that. There are also some of the financial firms, which are frequently some of our highest payers, are saying our profits are great right now, but we're assuming that there are asset bubbles sort of growing all over the country. So there's some pretty concerning data related to that coming out right now. So that reduction in the slope of the line, you could think of that as us sort of hedging against the possibility of a recession coming forward. I'm not saying we're going to have a recession, but what I want to make sure is that we don't make assumptions that get us completely out of whack for where we might be. Before you have to make any decisions related to those 28, 29 assumptions, we'll have a lot more data. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So motor vehicle rental tax, we're not making any changes here, but I just wanted to point out that if you look at deplaned passengers coming through the airport, which is really highly correlated with our motor vehicle rental tax collections, if you look at June, July, and August, we were just short of the pre-pandemic summer. So we continue to make progress in increasing travelers coming through Portland, and my assumption is that next year we'll be back or even a little bit better than that pre-pandemic level. If we could go to the next slide, please. So nationally, I'm going to come back to the employment discussion. So this is our initial weekly unemployment claims for the country. This is something that we put in almost every presentation we do. This is going to be typically our earliest indicator of weakening in the labor market. So you can see there's maybe like a little uptick in initial unemployment claims, but still at historically very low levels. The issue is that job openings and hiring has really slowed down. So companies aren't laying anyone off. They're also not hiring anyone. My interpretation of that is that if you're in a highly uncertain environment, you're going to say, okay, we're going to continue to do what we're doing now. We're okay. But we're not going to make a big investment, or we're not going to plan on expanding until we have more policy certainty. Right? So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is just total US employment. So you can see that pretty strong recovery from the pandemic, and then it is very clearly tapering off. If you look at a long period of employment growth, we don't tend to stay at plateaus. We're usually kind of going up or we're going down. So this is something we'll continue to watch very closely. Because of the county's revenue structure, we are much more insulated from business cycle changes than the state is. But this still potentially could show up in our BIT revenue collections. If we go to the next slide, please. And then locally, this is a slide I took from, excuse me, from the State Economist's Office. So this shows employment changes nationally in blue versus employment changes locally here in Oregon. This is an update from a graph that they showed last year, which showed Oregon growing. And there were some pretty significant data revisions that they incorporated into this. So in the last year, total non-farm employment for the country nationally has grown. For Oregon, it has declined. And then when you look at that disaggregated by industry in Oregon, it's really broadly based. So there's some issues locally that are really clearly connected to layoffs at Intel, at Nike, and some of our biggest employers. But then when you go a little bit lower, there's not great news kind of economy-wide. So as we're thinking about the money that's passed through to us from the state, this is the data that they're looking at as they're making assumptions around their income tax collections. So it's looking a little bit precarious. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is total employment and the unemployment rate for both Oregon and Multnomah County. So on the Oregon side, you see a reduction in employment and then an uptick in the unemployment rate down on the bottom. For Multnomah County, you see us plateauing below our pre-pandemic level, and then we've, the last couple of months have lost a few thousand jobs per month, and then we're seeing that uptick in our unemployment rate locally as well. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll move on to expenses. One more, please. So the bubble chart on the right is the breakdown of our general fund expenses by category. So personnel costs are just short of 62% of our total expenses. Personnel costs are us paying an employee of the county to do their job. Contractual services is a little bit more than 21%. In the general fund, if you look at what those contractual service dollars are going towards, about half of that is paying our contracted providers, who are mostly just paying their employees. So they're going to see that same upward cost pressure that we see in the general fund side. And then even internal services, a lot of what DCA is doing is paying their employees to manage our facilities and our IT. So even the portions of this that are not personnel are really closely related to personnel changes. So overall, for personnel, we expect our costs to go up by just short of 5%. That is much better than it was in our pandemic period, but it is still higher than what we need to be on a sustainable level. If we disaggregate that, the COLA we're assuming is 3.3%. I'll show you an inflation graph in a second that explains that. And then PERS, we'll come back to that in a little bit too. The other thing I want to note here is for internal services at this point, when DCA is doing all of their work to decide and working with the chair's office to decide what it is that they're going to do in the next year, I just need a placeholder to put in there. So I usually put the DCA-specific personnel inflation factor until we get different numbers. So right now, that's what's built into there, but DCA is in the process of finalizing their assumptions for 27. So when that's done, I'll come back and I'll change that number. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is mostly just a series of rules of thumb for you to give you a sense of what a 1% increase in COLA or what changes in PERS means. If we could go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the year-over-year change in the CPIW West Size A, which is the CPI measure that we use to calculate our COLA. So you can see it peak during that high inflation during the pandemic. It's come way down, and then right at the end there, it's starting to tick back up. So what it seems like is it has taken a while, but the impact of tariffs are starting to show up in the data. If you listen to what the Fed is saying about their assumptions going forward, is they've started to reduce interest rates in response to some of the weakening in the employment market that they're seeing. But a lot of their public statements have been, don't assume that we're committed to just reducing rates for the foreseeable future. And in fact, we're worried about what we're seeing with the stickiness of inflation. So for us, because personnel expenses really drive what's happening on the expense side, and then this is really closely tied to our cost of living adjustments for our employees. This number going back up is like the one thing that could really significantly change our expense assumptions going forward. So pretty small changes in our inflation assumptions lead to big changes in our financial outlook. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I want to talk about PERS for a little bit. So these two lines are the actual rates that we've had for Tier 1 and Tier 2 uniformed in the orange line, and then OPSRP non-uniformed in the blue line, and then the dotted portion is our assumptions going forward. So these are our highest and our lowest PERS rates, which is why we put them on here. So buried into our assumptions is the end of two PERS side accounts. One we expect to end in fiscal year 2028, and the other we expect to end in fiscal year 2030. The reason for that is before PERS reform, I think a year or two before that big PERS reform happened, PERS changed the rules around how you could amortize the benefit of your site account. So before that, you could pay for a site account and then you had to get 20 years of benefit for it. So they changed and said you can choose the period of amortization. At that time, pre-PERS reform, our assumption was that our rates would continue to go up until 2030, and then they'd start to decline after that. So we said, great, we'll amortize over 10 years. That's the period that we really need this benefit. And then once those end, then we'll just see our PERS rates naturally fall. So then PERS reform happened. So we funded our third and our fourth site accounts under that assumption. PERS reforms happened, and it made it so that the PERS rates aren't expected to go up as high. They basically stay flat through 2042. So I guess we outsmarted ourselves a little bit. And so we're losing the benefit of those two site accounts on the timeline that we thought, but our PERS rates aren't going down with it. So let me see, was there anything else? And then just as a reminder, that big spike in 2030 is associated with the expiration of the offset from the PERS surplus that we brought in, and then the decline is our PERS bond costs coming off. If we could go to the next slide, please. So we've had some questions about this, so I wanted to come back to this concept that we haven't talked about in a while. Christian hates this slide because it is from our old style of presentation. It was below Christian's aesthetic standards. This concept of PERS smoothing, I intentionally went back and I pulled a slide from a 2016 presentation just to demonstrate how long this has been along. This concept predates me, so it was really older CFOs, older budget directors, and economists who first implemented this idea. But the idea behind PERS smoothing is that rather than just let the state of Oregon every 2 years tell us how much they're increasing our PERS rates, we're going to sort of more actively manage it. And we're going to try to anticipate what PERS rates increases are going to be in the future. And we're going to try to smooth those increases out. So the idea is it decreases the volatility of cost increases that our departments are experiencing. But then also in those in-between years, like 2017 and 2019 on here, when we're over-collecting based on what our actual rates are, then that's what we're collecting, that's how we're collecting to pay the debt service on our PERS bond. And then we were also able to use that to fund some of our site accounts. So I usually say, I think Multnomah County has managed our PERS liability as well as any jurisdiction in the state. And a lot of that is due to implementing this PERS smoothing strategy over a decade ago and really sticking with it. If we could go to the next slide, please. One more. End up back where we started with a little bit more context around these numbers. If we want to go to the next slide, please. I'm a little bit conscious that we started late, so I'm trying to make up some time. One more slide, please. And now to the kind of the housekeeping stuff. So for fiscal year 2027, our assumption is that you all have $25.4 million of one-time only available. By board policy, you'd split that into two, and you'd have 12.7 for county facility and IT capital projects, and $12.7 million to be allocated. The way that we get there is that top bold number of $27.6 million. That includes the first of our two components of our one-time only. So that is $31 million of departmental underspending in fiscal year 2025. That $31 million is offset by the BIT came in lower than what I was expecting. So the second component of our one-time only is any forecast error that I've made in the previous year. That 4.2% departmental underspending, we'll have a memo again this year that we'll send to you that explains underspending by department. But there's a couple of things in there that I don't expect to continue into the future. So before the pandemic, our level of underspending was usually closer to 2%, and it seems like we're trending back in that direction. So if we were at 2%, then you would have significantly less one-time only available, and this is already quite a bit less one-time only than I think we've had over the last several years. We take that 27.6, we add that $2.2 million of changes that we noted earlier for the current year. That's the third component of our one-time only. I take out the amount we need to get our reserves to board policy level, and that's how you get to $25.4 million. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is a list of everything we've funded in the general fund for the current year with one-time only. So our assumption in the modeling is that all of these things go away. If there's anything on this list that you see that you think needs to continue, then that would change the forecast. If you could go to the next slide, please. And then one more, please. Just as a reminder, for contingency, you still have some regular contingency left, and then there's some of the additional contingency for uncertainty left, so that leaves about $2.8 million of non-earmark contingency, and then we still have the $100,000 for the lobbying transparency earmark. Next slide, please. So finally, we'll talk about risks or things that could change the forecast going forward. Open labor contracts are number one on that list. As we've talked about in the past, the last time we had this many open labor contracts, it increased our expenses quite a bit. So what we're assuming in the modeling and what we're going to build into the budget is basically status quo. We talked about inflation, and then we talked about some kind of worrying data and kind of labor markets and business cycles. So at this point, things like property taxes, I feel pretty confident that we're going to be close to what we're assuming. So it really is what's going on with inflation in our labor contracts, and then what's going on with BIT on the other side are really the things that could change our assumptions around the forecast. We will have several more months of data before the chair has to make any decisions for the proposed budget, so we'll update everything and make sure that you all are making decisions based on the best and most recent data. If we could go one more slide. And then just as a note on something we're planning, so you all have expressed a desire to have more information about the financial context of some of our non-general fund areas earlier in the process. So right now our plan is to come back in late January and to do the library district forecast, to have Josh Harwood from Metro come and give you a briefing on the SHS forecast. And then I think the PFA revenues, I think it's going to be difficult to figure out exactly where the PFA program side is and kind of all their planning, but we'll figure out some way to give you some appropriate context for PFA. It might not just be kind of all together in the way that we've done it in the past. So with that, if you could go to the next slide, which just says questions, we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much for the presentation and really delving into all of the different factors that impact what we're going to be looking at for the FY27 budget cycle. So just great information as always, and especially in this time of so much uncertainty that we're trying to figure out what the impacts will be. We'll go to the board for questions. We'll start with Commissioner Singleton.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the conversation yesterday. We were able to chat a bit. I don't have any new questions for you. I just want to appreciate again how digestible you make this information and the presentation for us. So thank you for the work that goes into translating what I think you probably don't say to other people in your line of work that you then say to us. I'll definitely want to keep an eye, obviously, on SHS, so I'll look forward to that forecast in the coming months. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Brim Edwards.
So I appreciate that you provided the pre-brief and answered a long list of questions I had. I guess I have less of a reflection. I might have some questions, but less of a set of questions, but more just a reflection on the data that was provided. Really concerning that in slide 4, just the economic overview, just all the sort of headwinds that we're facing, and then also the last point about Multnomah County lagging the rest of the Portland metro area, just from economically, that's concerning that we're being outperformed by the adjacent counties. And then really specifically the slide 18, which is the Oregon employment change by industry. And, just looking through the different sectors, we see that Oregon compared to the US on some really key sectors of the economy, which are traded sectors or like family wage jobs. We've seeing some big adjustments in a negative direction, while the country still has some positivity, but just looking at whether it's, construction, manufacturing, these are all like good family wage jobs, and seeing just some very concerning trends. And as I've often said, what's happening economically matters because that's what pays for core services. So if I'm flipping to the backside of the presentation around our expenses, like thinking about how this upcoming budget cycle, as we're facing economic headwinds, really focusing on core services. But I would say we should be very, very concerned about the data here because it's not something that we just easily are going to slip out of. So a question for you, Jeff, on the, this is back to the macroeconomics. Multnomah County lagging the rest of the Portland metro area, that statement. Can you just give us some, what are the data points you're using that describe that?
Yeah, so I'd also be happy to share some of the slides that Echo Northwest has been using lately. And so the way that they've approached it is they have taken kind of the 50 largest metro areas in the country and just put, employment growth, in bar charts and just rank them. So Portland metro area, like I said, I think is one of 5 metro areas nationally that have lost jobs recently. And then what they've done is then taken all of the counties that make up those top 50 metro areas and ranked all of them. And along a sort of number of factors, mostly related to employment, Multnomah County is performing worse than I believe 95% of metro area counties when it comes to employment growth. So they have some good graphs that illustrate that, but that's what I'm referring to.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
And so that's the 50 largest metro areas nationally, and then this also says that we're lagging the rest of the metro area. So is there then a click down between Multnomah and Clackamas and Washington?
Yeah, so the way that they've shown it, and we could get that comparative data, but the way that they've shown it is then contrasting us to Clark County, which has had stronger employment growth than I think like 75% of those metro counties. And it is I'm not sure if it's unique, but it is unusual to have that level of divergence within a metro area. So metro areas tend to sort of like kind of go up and down together. But to have one county in a metro area that's performing pretty well and then one that's really lagging is unusual.
So this particular statement is primarily based on a employment trend.
Yep.
And then on top of that, we have the permit group that you belong to that has some long name. But essentially, there's very few permits in the pipeline, and that would be another indicator more of like capital investment or new construction.
Yeah, that's right. And a data point that was just in the news this week is the survey of the Urban Land Institute does of, they survey institutional investors about kind of which metro areas they're most interested in investing in. Portland, or the Portland Metro for the second year in a row was 80 out of 81st. Which at some point you just get below a level on that list and it's just institutional investors aren't interested. So I'm not sure there's like a substantive difference between 80 and 70 maybe in some cases, but it just means we're below the level where institutional investors are really interested in coming here.
So no capital inflows. And then just to go back to the slide, I guess 11 would be the best one. This is the property tax. you use the 20 largest properties, and it essentially shows we have a rebasing that's going down, and then, as you explained it to you yesterday, that people appealing their property taxes is a much longer process, but this reassessment, or is that what you call it, where they can make some sort of change, and that triggers a reassessment versus appeal, and then they're getting a lower rate. You're looking at the top 20 properties, I'm assuming they're all downtown. If you took the top 100 properties, would we be seeing commercial properties, we'd be seeing very similar things, or is this?
I would, I'd want to get the data from Mike Vaughn's team before I answer that, but I know that as far as the appeals on real market value, basically every significant office building in Multnomah County has filed an appeal. As far as the reassessment that's pushing that maximum assessed value line down, I'm not sure how many of them have done it, but it seems to be a growing trend.
So if we know that when a building sales, what we've seen is a pretty remarkable drop in value. The US Bank Tower, 300-something million down to, I think, 30, I can't remember the exact number, but it's about a tenth of the value of its previous value. You said most of the commercial office buildings are under appeal, and that's a lengthy process. If they're successful, which it seems like the market says they probably will be, do they then, is that a retroactive to when they first made the appeal, or when the?
I don't know, I know Mike is sitting here if he wants to talk about the timing of all
I'm
of
just
this.
wondering if we're going to also have a lag in, if it's more widespread than the 20 office buildings, and then we have a lag, but then it's retroactive loss.
Mike Vaughn, County Assessor. It's a great question, but when we settle appeals either through an arbitrage process or a decision by a tax court, the refund comes out of the current distribution account, and then it's a go forward. So there is no look back. However, the go forward includes things like interest refund that are statutory as well.
So while the appeals process has been occurring, they've been paying the rate that they were assessed, and they paid interest, or we're paying interest back? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so what happens when a large account appeals and we can't get to settlement within, 6 months, it goes on to tax court. Tax courts can take 2 to 3 years to issue a decision on a significant tax account. So what we do during that time is we're not just static, and we're still generating tax bills. Taxpayer that's appealed is still paying subsequent tax years, but we're also looking at what we think is a likely outcome from the tax court. And so we're also looking at market data along the way, and we're reducing tax bills usually proportionate to what we think ultimately the business, the property's value would be. US Bank Tower is a great example. It sold for $373 million in 2015, I believe, and then this year it sold for $45 million. So, over the last, so over the last few years, we're definitely close, Commissioner. Over the last few years, we've been reducing that real market value down. I think last year we had $140 million on the roll. So that even kind of shocked us of where it sold recently, but we're continually reducing it so we're not dealing with large shock refund appeals, that sort of thing.
But it's still a pretty steep, not a cliff, but a steeper
A
decline.
climbable hill, maybe?
And if I could just make explicit how that kind of shows up in our assumptions is, so I told you we made our property tax assumption for 27 a little bit worse. That was really based on the fact that some of the low sale prices we've seen recently, we had been assuming that prices would bottom out as far as with respect to the tax roll in 26, but now we're assuming that won't happen until 27. And we've been working really closely with Mike, and a bunch of local economists meet with Mike on a regular basis to talk through this stuff. And we've assumed kind of whether an appeal drops it or whether it's Mike's team, like year after year, reducing values, we're going to kind of get to the same place.
That's the rock bottom.
That's the rock bottom.
Okay, thank you.
So since Mike's here, I did have a question for you because Jeff had mentioned that, a strategy that, commercial building holders are doing is asking for reassessments now at the point where it's low, because that kind of sets the reassessed value at a lower level than it might otherwise be. But we proactively can reassess. Is that correct? If we had enough staffing to do that kind of thing?
So I think the confusion is around two terms, reassessment and then reappraisal.
Okay.
Reassessment is when we're looking at generating a new maximum, I'll call it taxable value, or maximum assessed value. That can only happen under 6 conditions. So property had it was exempt from tax, it loses that exemption, it gets reassessed. It doesn't get reassessed on a sale, it doesn't get a new taxable value because a taxpayer wants it that way. There has to be a statutory reason why it gets a new maximum taxable value. Reappraisal addresses the value. And value, of course, we've got 300,000 accounts and we're continually looking at values every year on those tax statements. Does that make sense? Okay.
That's great, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Jones-Dixon.
Piggybacking off of what Commissioner Singleton mentioned, you have a gift. Thank you for putting all this in layman's terms. I don't have any questions. Well, that's just I guess a comment or a question to the board. I went to the Metro Chamber, their dinner last night, and Jordan, or Mr. Sinistro, he got recognized for his contributions to the community, and he mentioned that there's like sunbird or snowbirds that go out. What would it be like for us to have a sunbird or a sunbird community, meaning housing for folks that come for reprieve during the summertime? And then also when I was talking to one of the individuals at the dinner, they mentioned just listening or just being, they want to be a part of the solution and wanted to know if we could create a table where they can just share ideas, both for us and for the city. And I don't know if we could participate in that effort or facilitate that effort to address a lot of the challenges that are forthcoming. I apologize, my voice is shot.
No, that's great.
What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea, and people who want to contribute positively and meaningfully, that's always welcome.
We also have a economic landscape coming to us, so that'll be another thing, I think, layered in with a lot of the information that was in today's presentation that should give us some foundational places where we can focus.
Yeah, we're having, I think the economic development update, based on that report, is for early in 2026. I don't know if it's January or February, but we're looking to bring that. And, if we want to convene folks before that, that might be a nice thing to do. Okay. Commissioner Moria, I know you were, thank you for coming back after your meeting ended. I don't know if you have any questions at this point.
Yeah. One of the questions I had, which I'm pretty sure is a Measure 50. Is that the right one? Measure 50 was the 3%?
Measure 50 was the 3%.
Okay.
There's 5 and 50, but yeah.
So the long-term loss, let's say we rebounded, after, I'm making up a number of years, let's say in 6 years, our commercial real estate has rebounded. We're still not going to receive the same amount of tax, because once you've been assessed lower, you can only grow 3% per year. Is that correct for commercial?
For any property.
For any property.
So initially when I made that kind of a silly conceptual graph last year, so the idea behind that was to communicate that if real market value falls below maximum assessed value, then you can get a really significant drop. But then as real market value recovers, as long as it's below that MAV line, then your assessed value can go up quickly. And so coming out of the Great Recession, in places like Deschutes County and in Bend, where there were huge losses in residential property, some of those fell below the maximum assessed value line, then they had 7 or 8% increases in their property tax collections coming out of it. So instead, what it looks like will happen now is, RMV falls below, it brings assessed value with it, and then before we get that recovery, then that MAV line drops, right? So then once real market value goes back up, then we're back in what was a really normal situation to be in before the pandemic, where just real market value is so much higher than maximum assessed value for most properties. It's just an even more extreme version of that.
Does that make investing in Portland real estate more appealing?
Yeah, I'm not sure that property tax payment, I think it depends on a bunch of different factors, but lower property tax payments would. I'm not sure kind of where that gets you as far as like pushing you past the point where a project actually pencils. But there are, if you look beyond just our property tax revenue collections, which is what I'm focused on because that's what we care about. If you think about it from a broader economic picture, some of those low sale prices that we've seen, allow things to hit bottom. You have a new buyer come in who's not burdened with all of that debt, and they can invest in the property, and they can potentially even offer lower rents to people to come into the building. So I think there are some economic benefits of what's going on right now. It's weird to say benefit because it's more like early signs that things could improve. But yeah, from a narrow Multnomah County property tax collection perspective, it's probably a negative.
And then, I think sometimes it's hard to totally understand what the next several years are going to look like in this space. Is where we're seeing this loss of property value, to what degree does that directly correlate with the significant drop in demand for office space versus other types of commercial property?
So I think outside of the downtown core, there's some declines in values for commercial property, but it's not anything like what we're seeing downtown. And really, so downtown commercial, as we've defined downtown, I believe is like 3.5% of the total assessed value in Multnomah County. So even though we're seeing these big swings and it's making an impact, it's the difference between 3% growth in our property tax revenues versus 2.2% is what we were expecting this year and what we got pretty close to. So it's enough to kind of cause drag on growth, but it's not big enough to actually see any declines in property tax collections. So yeah, outside of the city core, in fact, I have the summary here. I just printed it out this morning. We're seeing some declines in multifamily real market value around the county. Not huge, but then also seeing some declines in total commercial property. But again, I think a lot of that is concentrated in downtown, and then other places are doing better or kind of just staying flat.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for the presentation again. Just really appreciate all this information. I just wanted to, this is really good to put in context, and as I said, this is kind of the kickoff of FY27. We're starting to have, I'll be delivering budget guidance later this month, and we'll be really looking ahead. I think for me, looking at facing multiple years of declining revenues, knowing that many of our partners are in the same boat, like the conversations that we're having about how we are trying to align the resources that we have to have the biggest impact on our community are more important than ever. I think, we're going to touch on that a little bit, have an opportunity to do some of that work later this afternoon in our joint session with the City of Portland Council. But we also know that this is a time where we're seeing a lot of uncertainty as a result of the federal administration, the state budget shortfalls, the legislature is meeting for legislative days next week, where they're going to be getting report outs from different state agencies on proposed cuts list. So I think everybody should be paying attention to that. But we also know we're seeing increased need from our community. And I'm really committed in focusing on how we deliver our core services as we weave our safety net and really deliver on the outcomes that our community most needs and wants right now. So this is going to, that's always a challenge. It's going to be especially challenging this year to do that work, to create a budget. But I'm looking forward to working with this board, with the community, with our employees as we make these challenging decisions and prioritize how to best serve our residents. So thank you guys so much for that. All right, we are a little bit over time. I have a hard stop at 12:30, but just wanted to see if folks had any final announcements for today. There is an AOC conference next week. Yes, so we will be, I know several people will be virtual next week. Our board meeting next week is in 100% virtual, so that folks have the flexibility to be down in Eugene if necessary. And okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to uplift a couple of things. We've seen an uptick in ICE activity in the community. I know Commissioner Jones-Dixon, you've seen this as well in your district. And we've also just heard the heartbreaking stories of folks being ripped from cars, picked up around schools and places of worship, being taken from work. I just wanted to appreciate my community. North Portland really showed up last week during the board meeting. We had multiple schools go on lockdown due to suspected ICE activity. And everybody really just showed up to support however they could. Whether it just being to observe and be there to make sure that kids and staff know that they are supported and that folks in this community have their back. So despite some of the really hard pieces, it was also really powerful to see how community showed up for people. I just wanted to highlight that after the report of ICE near a middle school last week in my district, administrators told my staff that almost 45% of the students did not come to school the next day. I spoke with county's employees in some of these schools and heard their concern for the trauma this is causing students and families. And part of why I wanted to bring this up today is that we've had some conversations as a board about how to support these households. And I think it's just really critical that we all come in next week with some ideas. The chair and I have been working on how we can strengthen our sanctuary status, and we'll have a work session next week. I think it's an opportunity to talk about potential investments that we can put out the door to support these households. Oftentimes either a breadwinner is being taken from a household, which then puts them in financial straits, or folks are afraid to go to work, and so that puts them in financial straits. We have people who are not willing to go out and pick up a food box like we talked about. We have people who are not willing to go out and go to their regular medical appointments. So it just feels important to keep saying that here. And just want to appreciate the chair and your team for the work that we're doing to move forward some improvements in our sanctuary policy. I also just want to share that about 2 weeks ago, USCIS announced that applicants who renew their work visas will no longer receive an automatic extension of their work permit while their application is pending. This means longer wait times, significant reduction of visa interview waivers, and it will require applicants to attend in-person interviews where we have already seen immigrants being taken and detained outside of the courthouse trying to get to their appointments. I will do some follow-up with the COO's office here. I know that we have staff who are impacted by this change. I think there's some ideas from the staff who were impacted about how we can best support them as county staff. And additionally, maybe something that we think we can do as we have our conversation about sanctuary status next week. The last thing I'll just uplift is just appreciating the Veterans Day event on Tuesday. We were able to be a part of opening a veterans shelter that is clean and sober space. And I just wanted to highlight it because this is one example of us listening to the people who we serve. Veterans said, it is very difficult for me to be clean and sober, and I'm trying to work sobriety, but I'm in a low barrier shelter. This is an issue I've raised repeatedly. You heard me again this morning about the Deflection Center. We have got to come up with solutions for folks that actually honors what they're asking for. Low barrier is very critical service. I've run low barrier shelter, and it is not the right environment for folks who are trying to work sobriety. So I just want to appreciate Do Good Multnomah, the Homeless Services Department as well, for really stepping up to provide an opportunity for these veterans and having this new community. It's absolutely beautiful shelter space, and I know that they'll do a great job of building community there. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other updates?
Just have one thing. It's a reflection on Commissioner Singleton just said is, when I got on the commission, I think we had fewer choices. I think one of the things that the county's done successfully is like there's more things to fit more people. Like maybe this doesn't work for this person, but there's another option. So really expanding the types of options that people have, and we increase the likelihood of there being a good fit for more people. And then on a just totally separate note, this is sort of falls under some of the transparency work I'm interested in, is I'm going to be bringing to the commission just a proposal of looking at how do we make our administrative procedures public facing. So currently, obviously, our ordinances are public facing, but administrative procedures, which is a lot of the detail, and which could change with people not knowing, but they're not public facing, and looking at how do we, again, make more of our work accessible, not just to the commission or people who work at Multnomah County, but also to the broader public. And again, I've had some instances where I've been asked by the community about something, and it's like, well, that's not an ordinance, but it's in administrative procedure, and then, you know, how do people have access to that, and just helping people navigate through both our ordinances and our administrative procedures, and just, you know, how to work better with the county. So I'm going to be bringing that forward.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Moyer.
Yeah, I wanted to bring an issue forward that I'm looking for support from the commission and probably also stakeholders, which is this board has supported an effort of trying to expand access to long-term care for people with severe and persistent mental illness who are entitled to that care. We know, although we acted before getting the health share data match, it more strongly confirms that 50% of our shelter population are experiencing severe persistent mental illness, of which 71% have a co-occurring substance use disorder. And the state of Oregon simply does not have access to the level of supports necessary for a small percentage of individuals with higher acuity, and we really cannot stretch our SHS dollar any further than we are, and we really need the partnership of the Oregon Health Authority and the state of Oregon to bring in the services that they already say they offer to this population but have made absolutely impossible to access. I cannot speak highly enough of the staff who have worked with me on this project and how we are knocking on every possible door. It is a really impressive group of multi-departmental experts. We are lifting every rock, trying to come up with creative solutions. Not only is the state not helping us, they are actively creating incredibly pointless barriers to people enrolling in services that they clearly are entitled to. And so I am asking for support for a letter from this Board of Commission to the governor and the leadership of the Oregon Health Authority, asking them to please be a partner in what is obviously a needed amount of service for some of our homeless population that we have got to partner together on in order to wrap around the right supports. I'm happy at any other occasion to go through the numerous roadblocks that they have put in our way, and I'll certainly speak to that in the letter, but I wanted to bring this forward because we have reached a point with the health authority and the governor's office where they are obstructing our ability to get people the services they are legally entitled to, which are major barriers to providing them the right supports to be successfully housed long-term. And so I'm bringing this forward. I will bring a draft forward, but I wanted to draw attention to that issue and also, let it be known that we are working very hard as a county to try to meet the various needs of different people in our houseless community. This is a subset of individuals we have to have the state's partnership on, and they are not holding up their part of the bargain.
I'm supportive.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Moyer, and just really appreciate your attendance and participation in the meeting last week with the AOC membership around a part of that conversation around the contracting with that. More to come on that. I wanted to just speak to a topic we've discussed as a board regarding utility access and shutoff protections for folks in our community. So this is something that was uplifted in the recommendations delivered to the board last week in the report from the EOC that's coordinating our work to the federal actions. I'm sure most of you have heard that PGE, Pacific Power, and I think just this morning, Northwest Natural as well, have temporarily suspended service disconnections for certain qualified customers through the end of the year. This is a move that I really appreciate, and I think that we need to continue to consider the ways in which the prolonged federal shutdown and other federal actions have created immense economic hardships and instability for lots of families and individuals. That includes those who might not have been in the existing population of income-qualified households, for instance, people who might have been impacted if they had a federal employee who was losing income during the shutdown. And that even for households who do qualify, a key source of energy assistance funding, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or better known as LIHEAP, hasn't yet arrived to the states, so we are still waiting on those dollars. We hear from our energy assistance program that it is not clear when they will receive those funds and be able to support community members in need. So while I'm very relieved that the federal shutdown has ended and that our utility partners have taken some steps voluntarily to protect their customers, I think we share a recognition on this board that there are likely more headwinds to come. Next week, the Oregon Public Utility Commission will hear comment on a permanent rulemaking process related to disconnection protections. This is a process that our Department of County Human Services and our Office of Sustainability have engaged very thoughtfully on for a while. I'm grateful for their work on that. In addition to that ongoing work, we've learned that a coalition of energy justice advocacy partners has submitted a proposal to the PUC to extend a moratorium on disconnections through April 2026 or 45 days after LIHEAP funds arrive, whichever is latest. That would ensure that no customers would face heat or power shutoffs during the cold winter months. Commissioner Singleton and I are working on a letter in support of this proposal, which we'll circulate to your offices for consideration if you'd like to sign on as well. And I'd welcome other members of the board to join in this shared statement of support.
Can I just ask a question about that? I happened to read a news story about that, and one of the things, I couldn't tell whether the utilities actually then just recoup the if there's a non-payment, whether they recoup it through a submitted rate increase to the rest of the ratepayers, or whether this is the utilities actually maybe reducing their profits.
Yeah, we can have the Office of Sustainability and DCHS follow up on that.
Yeah, I just think if it's the latter, that's one thing. I want to be thoughtful about it. Also, what we might want to communicate to on sort of who's paying for that and the level of profits that a for-profit utility or an investor-owned utility might be getting, and how it impacts everybody too.
Thank you. The last thing I just wanted to do is give a shout out to Bienestar. They have been doing incredible work serving our community over the last several weeks, and they've really gone above and beyond. And I know some of the things that Commissioner Singleton, you brought up in terms of, like folks who are afraid to go out and get sustenance. They have been home delivering food and really trying to engage the community in the best ways. And one of the most beautiful things have been, I think, about how we've seen neighbors caring for and stepping out for their neighbors. So there is a lot of great anecdotes there. I'll email some of those out to the board since we're running out of time, but just wanted to give them a shout out for the great work that they're doing. So thank you so much. Our meeting on November 20th is going to be virtual. Thank you. That concludes today's business for our regular board meeting. Being no further business, we are adjourned.